It is Romania Black, and we are doing something a little bit weird today. We are on chapters 93 and 94 of Scum Villain. And this, I say that we're doing something a little bit weird because already in volume 4, it's been a trip. And even though the publishing company has organized these chapters in certain ways, we've not exactly been going by the order of the English translation publishers. We've been going by the order of MXTX and how she released the chapters to begin with. So we've been looking at chapters 82 and 84. 82 through 86 are in the same order in the English translation, but then we've jumped around to 87 and 88, and then we've jumped around to 89 and 90, and now we've gone back to 91 and 92, but that's the order that MXTX wrote them in, so that's the order that we're reading them in, because we're trying to be chronological. Now, thematically, we may be able to see some patterns in why 7Cs chose to publish it in the order that it did once we get there. But we're doing something very different this week. We are going to be looking at chapter 93, which is in the very back of the book. It is the second to last chapter in the book. And then we're going to be going back towards the front to look at chapter 94, which is towards the front of the book. So I'm like, why? We'll find out as we read, and it may become more clear to there. I'm assuming if this chapter 93 is towards the back of the book, it's probably connected to Shen Jiu and BINGQIU, but then again, so could the first chapter either. So we'll see about that. But I have a lot of comments to get through before we talk about these chapters because on YouTube, chapters 81 and 82, 80 and 81 have been out, and then 82 and 83 through 84 we've started volume 4 on Patreon as I'm recording this, and we finished up volume 3 on YouTube, and there were a lot of comments. There were a lot of comments, and I want to say thank you all. Thank you so much for being very kind and considerate. There were a lot of really good comments. There were a lot of comments that respectfully disagreed with me, and that's cool. The good thing about fiction is we can like characters that other people don't like, and that's totally fine. And everybody was really respectful, so I'm very appreciative of that. Obviously, the moderators flagged some comments they said had spoilers for later on chapters I haven't read yet, but for the most part, I was able to read all of those chapters, and I'm very appreciative and grateful. I'll be honest, chapters 80 and 81, I was like, oh, everybody's going to stop watching because it was like, because you're stuck in a room by yourself and you feel very isolated and you're like, does anybody agree with me or know what I'm saying? And you all have come out and said, no, we were there. We kind of got what it was like. My biggest concern is chapters 89 and 90, which y'all haven't got to yet as I'm recording this. That's my biggest hurdle. If we can get past 89 and 90, we'll be doing great, because those chapters, I'm like, oh my God, I don't like being emotional and vulnerable and like that. It's not me. It's not how I am in real life. So to be in this room crying my eyes out and screaming over fictional characters is weird to me, but I guess you all are kind and appreciative. So I appreciate that a lot. But I wanted to go through some of these comments because some of them kind of reword things I've been trying to say in ways that I feel are smart, and you all are great for saying those things. And then some of you point out some really interesting things. So Cardboard Sheep said, the ending of Scum Villain's self-saving system is indeed quite controversial, and though I think you hit the nail on the head about the themes and how the sex scene was supposed to be and was upsetting and unsexy, I also agree the conclusion of the story itself was unsatisfying to me and felt super rushed. I love the world, the characters, and the humor of Scum Villain, but the end had me choking on a bun. Wait, was that the point all along? And I kind of wondered that. I kind of got off on this headcanon after reading Cardboard Sheep's comment, being like, were we supposed to react the same way that Shen Jiu reacted? Was that the point? Were we supposed to get mad at the abrupt ending and be like, MXTX, what the fudge? And MXTX is like, well, now you know how Shen Jiu felt. And now we've made it a Donmai, so we fixed the situation. And if that is the case, and that was the goal, because we know that the goal in part was to subvert the Stallion novel tropes and then make it a Donmai, and to point out how the Donmai is better for reasons. I get that, but if the goal was to make us like as viscerally upset as Shen Jiu was, then 1, mission accomplished. But 2, that kind of makes me feel a little bit better about the ending, being like, MXTX, you're a better writer than this. Why did you do these things? But if it was by design like that, then Bold move, Cotton. Bold move. I still think it's too abrupt for me, and it leaves so much potential that even with a volume of extras, it's not going to develop because these extras are all like vignettes. They're not a through line plot. It's not like volumes 1 through 3 where there's a plot and a thread and a motion and a build and a climax and a resolution. These are just little side stories. So while I am appreciative that we have so many side stories, and that they are as fleshed out as they are, it's not the same as extending the main story. So it's kind of like just after bonus things, which I'm very grateful for, and MXTX does a good job with them, but I still wish she had been given at least one more volume to do the main story, and then we could have gotten to volume 4's content, but it is what it is. But thank you, Cardboard Sheep. I really appreciate that comment. That gave me a good laugh. Way 3845 says, also, I wonder if I may finally shamelessly shine some light on the confusion about the big fog of misunderstanding. And I was like, wait, what? Nothing plot related. Short answer. It's just a weeb internet slang. Chinese readers would not think too much when they read it. Long but interesting linguistic answer is big fog is a funny wordplay tweak to the load word of Japanese internet slang for big misunderstanding. Fog is a homophone to misunderstanding in Chinese. Besides, big fog has better visual metaphors and extra layers of internet humor in it. Many netizens, especially those who are in the know of Japanese anime subculture like MXTX herself, use those linguistic reborrowings in online context a lot. I hope this helps. Well, yeah, it helps, but now I'm kind of pissed. No, but I was like, so that whole fog of misunderstanding was just an inside joke that if you were Chinese or Japanese or knew the culture, you'd get it and go, oh, that was a funny Easter egg. And that was it? What? I feel like a moment in Heaven Official's Blessing where I found out something at the end of Heaven Official's Blessing and I was like, I've been worried about that for how many weeks now? What? So that just is mind-blowing. I guess for me, it was something that just pops up once and MXTX just references it. So yeah, it makes sense it was just a joke. But on the other end, I'm like, you mean to tell me that was it? It makes sense. I'm not mad about it, but I was like the genie in Aladdin that was like, ugh. Well, I feel sheepish. That's exactly how I felt after reading that. But thank you, Wei, for clearing the fog of misunderstanding. I was like, I kept thinking there'd be like some big plot point with the fog of misunderstanding, that Lo Binghe would have his own system and it would be in conflict with Shen Jiu's system and it'd be like this battle of the AI or something. I kept thinking it was going to go that route. I guess the fan fiction can do it if MXTX doesn't have time, but that's just so wild to me. But whatever. Maya Hiranoyama 1191 says Shen Jiu for me, because of this, he's a lot more like Hua Chong or Lan Zhan, because the one who sacrifices so much for a loved one was him. I'm not saying Lo Binghe didn't make any effort, it's just that even if not romantically since the beginning, Shen Yan always considered Lo Binghe's well-being and happiness and was willing to sacrifice so much for him. Yes, I think that's like I hadn't thought of it in the context of Shen Jiu being more like the love interest in the other two novels, but he kind of is. And I'm like, that's interesting. Although Lo Binghe, he is kind of like Wei Wuxian a little bit, but then Shen Jiu is kind of like Wei Wuxian. So I like that MXTX has given us a plethora of protagonists and love interests, because honestly, when I knew I was going to be reading 3 stories by the same author, I was like, is it going to be like the same story and the same love interests for 3 different things? They are very different. And I was very happy about that. I'm like, okay, no, we're actually good there. Cool. The next comment was from Angry is a Panda. I kind of wish they stayed at the peak party with everyone. I know this is just how MXTX likes to end her books, and with the MCs walking into the sunset, but the boy spends so much of this book feeling alone and isolated, one of the things that causes most of the problem, that after all that shit, it would really be nice to be with everyone. Shen could finally open up and be around people that he trusted and cared about. He wouldn't have to hide anything or feel that he had fixed everything in the world. And Lo Binghe could finally be in a non-toxic environment with other people, seeing them let him stay despite the trouble he caused, and it could help his horrible self-esteem and mindset. I'm not a therapist, and it might just be a personal gripe. No, I've been trying to say and figure out a way to say, why I've wanted Lo Binghe to let Shen Jiu have friends and stick around, and I've not been able to articulate it as well as you just did in that paragraph. That's exactly what I wanted to say. In the way that you talked about how it's the fact that they're isolated, and it's like they've been isolated this whole time throughout the story, and it's like, well, you know, we could have them, you know, be friends with everybody, and it help both of them to get out of that isolation and find a sense of community. Or we could just let them go run off together and see what shenanigans they come up with. I feel like in comparison to the other stories that MXTX does later, by the time we get to the point where the main characters are riding off into the sunset, they're both in a stable mental and emotional and relationship state to where it's healthy and okay for them to go off and do that. But Shen Jiu and Lo Binghe are not at that point, so it doesn't make as much sense. So I was like, okay, you basically said everything I wanted to about that, and I'm really glad you made that comment. LolG2145 says Scum Villain was published online in 2014, which was 10 years ago. Oh my God. And back then, people were generally less aware and sensitive about dubcon, consent, respect between couples, and all of that, at least in my experience as a Chinese person living in China. If I had read this book back in 2014, I think I would have loved it. The fact that I now feel uncomfortable with how the relationship works in the story really shows how much social awareness around those issues has grown. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I know I do Janu Yowie every January. I've got a whole folder of different reactions I've done. You should check it out. And there are some from the 90s and early 2000s that I'm like, looking at you, Sex Pistols. Then I'm like, oh, these were things, these were ideas. And I do agree that I think in part we are as a culture, at least online, a lot more aware of how these types of tropes can be harmful and how they're not healthy and how it's kind of cool if you want to kink with it just for fun and fiction, sure. But there are people that are affected by it and it does have consequences. But I agree. Back in 2014, well, I told them in my reply, I was like, my situation happened in 2010. So I would have not have been... And I wouldn't have even read this in 2014, if I'm honest. I don't think I could have handled it. I think I'm just now comfortable 10 years later talking about, I didn't talk about my situation until like 2020, like 10 years later, or 2019. So I don't think I would have felt even comfortable reading this story back then because it was still so viscerally affecting. But I do think overall that the times they do a change and people do become more aware. And a lot of people were talking about like, you know, they like toxic couples in fiction and things like that. And that's fine. You can like that if you want to. My thing is, if people come out and say, oh, I like them because they're toxic and that's my fiction and it's my escapism and that's fine. That's totally cool. It's when people tell me that something is okay in a relationship that I'm like, but is it? So that's when I kind of like go, oh, I don't know. But if you're just saying that you like kinkery and toxicity for your fiction, then I'm like, you do you, basically. I'm not going to tell anybody that they're wrong unless it's harmful to someone else, you know. Awesomely Sundere says, as a lover, and this was another comment that I was like, yes, thank you for bringing this up. As a lover of the found family trope, I hate how there was so much potential for that with the peak lords and students. Potential that was just thrown completely away for the romance. It felt very Twilight for me, and I hate the trope of family and friends don't matter as long as you have your one true love. Oh my God, yes. Again, I was like, there was this kind of cool found family with Shen Jiu and the disciples and Liu Qingge and all of this. And I was like, yes, that's so cool. I love that. And I feel like the series kind of misses its mark a little bit because it sort of abandons all that and does what Twilight does and is like, let's just go off and abandon everyone and live on our own and it'll just be the two of us and we don't need anybody else. And I'm like, community's important. So I absolutely understand where you are coming from with that. So yes. Then Holy Milk 1867 says, one thing I find a bit disappointing is that Lo Binghe's adoptive mother is barely coming up in the story after the beginning. I wish she weren't basically forgotten by the narrative in favor of upholding Su Jian. They both deserve proper acknowledgement. That was something too. Going into the end of volume 3, when the Jade Pendant, we knew the Jade Pendant was going to get used. And I was like, okay, we're going to bring up Lo Binghe's adoptive mom. He's going to like make comparisons to her compared to his real parents who weren't there for him, even though Su Jian did a lot, obviously. But I kept thinking that his adoptive mom was going to come back into the story and that Shen Jiu was going to give him the jade pendant. It was going to tie to that. It was going to be this big moment. And that's not what MXTX had planned. But I was really surprised. And I kind of wish she got more acknowledgement too. Because even when we get to the extras so far it's more been about Tianlong Jun and Su Jian. And the poor adoptive mom is kind of just kicked to the curb. And it's like, but she deserved a lot of flowers as well. So Holy Milk, I'm glad you brought that up. Then Amelia Jean-Claus says, I've been going through your other MXTX videos while waiting for the weekly updates to this one. There's a lot of them, so I hope you've been enjoying them. I just reached the second to last video on your Modao Zushi playlist, and in it you read from an interview with MXTX where the author says they were influenced by Wuthering Heights, and that they found the love stories in there really exciting. I've never read Wuthering Heights, but in the video you mentioned that it is very angsty and that you wanted to shake a couple of the characters and tell them to get over themselves and communicate, which reminded me of your reaction to some parts of Scum Villain Self-Saving System. So, do you think that some of her writing in the first book of hers might be due to MXTX recently reading Wuthering Heights? If I remember correctly, she read that in high school and wrote this story around the same time. You connected the dots. You cracked the code. There are a few stories in literature that just make me like put my hand into a little ball, into a little fist, and want to punch a window out. There's one fictional character that I think is my least fictional character of all time, and that is Daisy in The Great Gatsby. She is a trifling hoe, and I cannot stand her, and I would chuck her out a window. But I like Great Gatsby as a whole. It's fine. But Daisy is the worst. And then there is endings of books, and The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck. I have actually thrown my book at a wall because I was so frustrated by the end of it. It's one of the weirdest, most frustrating endings to a book I've ever read. And there's that. But if you want to talk about on a whole, there are two stories that I read throughout high school and college that I was just like, one was Beowulf. And if you've watched some of my other reactions, you will know that I'm not a fan of Beowulf. I don't really care for Beowulf. Get Beowulf out, get Gringold and whatever her face out, get Grindelwald or whatever her face is out of here. Swamp bitch, go and get out. But the other book that I really didn't like was Wuthering Heights. I had a Victorian lit class and I was just like, And here's my thing. My thing with Victorian lit, I've watched North and South, which is a BBC special, but it deals with like working class people dealing with, it has like the working class alongside the bourgeois, and like there's a lot of conflict. It's very relatable. It's interesting. Victorian lit frustrates me because it is hashtag first world problems. Oh no, there are 6 suitors that want to date me in my heated home while the peasants are dying. However shall I afford my 5th pair of shoes to go on dates with all of them? I cannot. I was like, bitch, get over yourself. And so, yeah, Heathcliff and Catherine. I just want to like jump off a bridge. I get it. Yeah, no. Scum Villain borrows a lot of romantic elements from Wuthering Heights, only it makes them more visceral, grotesque, and sexual. But those two main characters in Wuthering Heights, they didn't communicate. They constantly were misunderstanding one another. They were constantly being like, woe is me, but why? And I was like, you both are rich bitches. Shut up. Just talk it out. Like, at least Pride and Prejudice, there was some chemistry and romance and conflict, but God, no, I read your comment and I had like this seething bile rise up within me. And I think the worst part was in that class, I had a teacher that really liked Victorian lit, and they were just like, oh, just look at the romance, look at the way it's the status culture, and blah. And I was just so over it. I was like in my Moulin Rouge era where I was like beauty, truth, and love down with the bourgeois. And I was like, get the Duke out of here. And so I don't like Wuthering Heights. So the fact that Scum Villain borrows some elements of it makes sense, and makes sense why I have a problem with it. So 22-year-old Romania really didn't like Wuthering Heights, and 36-year-old Romania is still not a fan. So thank you, Amalia, for tapping into my nostalgia and making me have helicopter blades in the background flashing through everything. So anyway, Anime Annie then had a couple of comments. They said, I love the conversation that Shen Jiu and Shang Qinghua have regarding airplane shooting towards the skies writing. Yes, especially Shang Qinghua explicitly saying he has no issue with his novel having become what it was, or his male protagonist now being gay. My theory is because he's been gay all along and now it gets to freely go the way that he originally wanted it to. His rant, though, about writing the kind of stuff that he did well in comparison to what he wanted to write, felt very much like commentary on the masses enjoying the same kind of stories over and over a more in-depth character analysis type of story. It also reminded me of some anime bros that will only ever consume shonen or seinen media and take affront at other fans of said media having headcanons or simply reading the subtext in some of the stories about the sexuality of some of the characters within those pieces of media. I think that's interesting. I thought that too, the commentary about Shang Qinghua not being able to write what he wanted to appease the masses. And so a part of me is like, I feel like MXTX wanted to go against the grain with how the story ended and make this story different than what we expected, which is fine. But the thing that she's not, to me at this point, kind of gotten through is just that complexity and that deep character analysis. Like have these characters talk more to each other, and that's not happening. And so I'm kind of like, okay, it's like, it felt like in theory that's what you were going for, but I don't know in execution if it's paid off yet. But I'm only halfway through, so maybe that will change. But I agree. Like, I've watched a lot of shonen on this channel and a lot of seinen. I'm a shipper. I like romance, but also, I'm sorry, sometimes when you see subtext, you're like, it's right there. Like, I'm watching Blue Lock right now, and it's right there. And I was like, when they give it to you on a silver platter, are you just supposed to ignore it? And I have had a lot of people comment and be like, especially when I was reading Berserk, which is a very dark, heavy seinen. I was shipping some couples and they're like, why are you shipping them? And they're not gay and all this. And I was like, well, it's my opinion and I'm just having fun with it, and go away if you don't like it. It's a fictional analysis. You don't have to watch me and agree with me. But yeah, I definitely understand that and can relate about the anime bros. I'm like, Also, Anime Annie says, that line though, the story between you and me has only just begun. Considering the previous part was in the third person, I thought that it felt like MXTX was speaking to the reader in the form of a narrator. It felt like a fourth wall break, that she'd write more and take us on more journeys with other characters. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's just, I mean, it could be talking about volume 4. It could be talking about her other stories that she had planned. So that's really exciting. I like that. Then we had this line here, and Anime Annie, have you ever had a moment where somebody's known you better than you know yourself, and they reveal something that reveals something about yourself, and you're like, that was this moment? Because Anime Annie says, honestly, Shin Jiu accepting Lo Binghei's neediness in the moment and just being like, well, I just love him, felt very much like Ariel telling King Triton, but daddy, I love him. At least Shin Jiu has known Lo Binghei longer and knows him better than Ariel knew Prince Eric at the time. I would say that you're Shin Jiu until it comes to personal and romantic relationships, and then you're more like Liu Qingge. And I was like, yeah, that's it. If I was in The Little Mermaid with Shin Jiu Ariel and Lo Binghei Eric, I would be Sebastian the Crab, no doubt. But if I was in this, yeah, I am Liu Qingge. Like, I feel like I'm like Shin Jiu, but when it comes to the relationship part, I am Liu Qingge 100%. I like, wow. I felt like a soul-searching moment had arrived, which is just absolutely crazy. And then finally, I know I've nearly talked for 25 minutes, but this is my last comment, I promise. Thank you for bearing with me. But there were a lot of really good comments, and this isn't even half of them. I couldn't get all of them, but some of them were going to say things that I've talked about in previous discussions, so I just let them go because I'm like, well, I'm going to talk about that eventually. But Icy says that Bingay is the character that Shin Yan was a fan of, but Bing Mei is the person that Shin Jiu knows the most. Congratulations, congratulations. Important things must be said twice. There's been a new ship unlocked, Shin Yan and Bingay. And yeah, whenever Icy said that, I was like, yeah, the OG Lo Binghe is the one that Shen Yan was a fanboy of. And the one that he was a fan of in his own weird way. But Bing Mei, who is like the whiny needy one, is the one that he's now with. So I was like, that complicates and makes things very different. Although, you know, Shen Yan only knew Bingay as a character that he was a fan of. It's kind of like when he saw Xia Hualing for the first time. Once he got to know her, he was like, oh, never mind. And now that he's been around Bingay, he's like, no, I kind of prefer Bing Mei over here. He's fine. I prefer him. But Bingay and Shen Yan as a pair, I'm sure there's fan fiction of it. I'm sure. Icy also says, it's weird to note, but our Lo Binghe and the OG Lo Binghe both have issues with consent. And I think that's the issue that comes from, one, a high schooler's version of consent, and two, Sheng Qinghua also has a problem with consent made clear by his writing. I mean, I don't want to throw airplane shooting towards the sky under the bus, but he did create this story. He did make these characters. It is kind of his problem. And I'm sure that somewhere in this middle section that we haven't gotten to yet, or maybe this week, we'll get to some Sheng Qinghua. I need it. I need Sheng Qinghua to do some answering for his sins. And maybe we'll get there, because I'm sure we haven't gotten to a Sheng Qinghua story yet in the extras. I'm sure it's there. But the question is, are we going to get to it this week or not? We'll see. But yeah, and also a high schooler's version of consent is different because, and that's not a dig at MXTX because MXTX can't help that they were in high school. But I think back on the stories I watched when I was in high school and the things I thought were fine. And I look back on that and I go, wow, my tastes are a little bit different. And I can see this with a little bit more nuance now that I'm older and have more experience and have talked to more people and know more stories. And I do think that that's a big part of it. Shen Qingqiu points to several instances that the OG Binghe had intercourse with women that was less than consensual, literally his first time. The Shen Qingqiu also makes a bold statement that no one would ever say no to Lo Binghe because of the implication, as you would see on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Then, in this chapter, Lo Binghe attempts to sleep with him under a false identity. Lo Binghe and the OG Lo Binghe are alike in many ways, that they can never not have things in common. It's just their paths diverged a long time ago and they've become different people. Yeah, the influences and everything, it's all made them into different individuals, but at their core, they are still the same person and those elements are still there. It's just, you know, how Sheng Qinghua wrote them. So, yeah, anyway. I've talked for nearly 30 minutes, so I'm sorry about that, but you all had amazing comments and I wanted to address them, especially now that we're at the halfway point of the novel. So yeah, thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for all the kindness. We'll see when we get to chapters 89 and 90 and those comments. But in the meantime, let's not waste any more time, shall we? I got my coffee. I'm ready to go. We're going to start chapters 93 and 94 of Scum Villain Self-Saving System and see what we get. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. I imagine we're going to get two very different chapters that possibly have two very different character sets, maybe. Although it might be like one adventure of Shen Qingqiu with somebody else, or one adventure with like maybe Tianlong Jun or something like that. Part 31, chapter 93. 100 random questions on Lo Shen's affinity. Okay, so it's Lo Binghe and Shen Qingqiu. This is the second to last chapter in the story, so I feel like the last chapter is like, this is a chapter leading up. At least this is the second to last chapter in the 7 Seas version. So this being the second to last makes sense because I'm sure the last chapter, chapter 100, is going to be like about Lo Binghe and Shen Qingqiu. So let's see what we get. The questionnaire interviewees, Lo Binghe and Shen Qingqiu. I mean, hey, maybe this will give us some communication between the two of them and actually build their relationship. I've been wanting that the entire time. So yes, the questionnaire interviewer. Airplane shooting towards the sky. He's finally here. That rat bastard. He's finally here. The questionnaire provider. The system. Oh my God. All right. Airplane shooting towards the sky system had issued him a quest. Oh, an extremely bizarre questionnaire. He had no idea what the questionnaire was trying to ascertain. The further down he read, the more disturbing the questions became. But no matter how disturbing it was, he had to farm some points, didn't he? After abandoning his dignity, what little remained in the first place, and pleading with Master Shen Qingqiu finally reluctantly agreed to bring along that disciple he'd raised for the purpose of completing this questionnaire. Now presenting live updates from Airplane. Okay, so I'm assuming this is after everything's gone down in Volume 3. And I like that Sheng Qinghua has his own system. You're the writer of the story, but okay. That's telling him he has to do this. Who's he farming points for? What's his? Because Shen Qingqiu's system is based around Lo Binghe. So what is Sheng Qinghua's system based around? He's the author. Anyway, your names, please, asked Sheng Qinghua. Having just sat down before hearing this question, Lo Binghe raised his eyebrow and said unhappily, "If you don't even know our names, why would you ask us anything?" Aww. Oh, Lo Binghe, honey, you don't know how an interview works. Your ages. To tell the truth, Shen Qingqiu really didn't know how precise the age of his body. He raised his head at Sheng Qinghua. Wouldn't you know better than I do? Sheng Qinghua twirled the brush in his hand. He'd never thought about this question either, so he figured he might as well just say whatever. Therefore, he randomly wrote a number down in a couple of strokes. Your genders. Having received 3 idiotic questions right off the bat, Lo Binghe had already stopped bothering to answer. Shen Qingqiu couldn't take it anymore either. We've been recategorized into the green JJ's Donmai section. What do you think? Sheng Qinghua silent. I like that he says that and Lo Binghe has no clue what he's talking about. He doesn't know what green JJ's Donmai section is. Sheng Qinghua silently drew a line through the next 30 or so similarly stupid questions and started asking anew. How is your personality? Shen Qingqiu thought for a while. All right. Probably. This Shen should be considered relatively easy to get along with. Don't know, said Lo Binghe. And what about your partner's personality? Shen Qingqiu began counting off traits. Crybaby, maiden-hearted, lovesick, chunbyo, clingy. A watery shimmer shone in Lo Binghe's eyes. Having been disparaged, he felt a little hurt, but he still obediently answered the question. Well, naturally, Shizun's personality is the best, gentle and strong and considerate. Shen Qingqiu fell silent. Suddenly he felt a bit bad. What is this? I mean, Shen Qingqiu, you shouldn't feel bad. You are correct on all counts. It's just Lo Binghe is a whiny crybaby who just happens to worship you, so what can we do? But don't tell him he's great if he's not. He coughed dryly twice and changed his tune. Well, actually, this child's personality isn't too bad. He has one good trait that is especially rare. He listens and does as he's asked. That's enough in itself. Does he do as he asks? I think chapter 89 would beg to differ, but okay. A blush rose on Lo Binghe's cheeks. When did the two of you meet? Sheng Qinghua asked in a monotone. And where? He already knew the answer to this question. The first time I met Shizun was right after I passed Sangjiang Mountain's initiation trials. Shen Qingqiu was feeling ill at ease. At that time, Lo Binghe had met the original flavor, not him, and it was not a particularly wonderful memory either. He waved his fan. A pass, pass! What was your first impression of your partner? Lo Binghe continued to reminisce. A lofty, untouchable immortal, he said buoyantly. A small bun, Shen Qingqiu said frankly, and a handsome little sprout. What do you like about your partner? He listens to me well enough, Shen Qingqiu said kindly. Lo Binghe smiled. I like everything about Shizun. What do you hate? Nothing, Lo Binghe said firmly. Shen Qingqiu was a little moved by this resolute and decisive answer, so he reciprocated and said nothing. Besides, if he really said he hated something and made Lo Binghe cry in front of someone else, well, that would be way too shameful. How do you address your partner? Finding this dull, Lo Binghe turned his head. Shizun, these questions are ridiculous. Exactly what did we come here for? Like, don't be rude, Lo Binghe. Be good, Binghe. Shen Qingqiu said calmly. It's just a formality. Think of it as saving your Shang Shishu's life. Because he knows about the system. How do you want your partner to address you? Lo Binghe's face reddened. This bashful reaction made an ominous premonition well up inside Shen Qingqiu when he waved his hand. Oh, pass, 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 pass. Having caught on to a possible point of interest, Shang Qinghua wheedled, "What do you mean, pass? If you just pass every single question, what's the point in asking? Bingay, she's see. Go ahead and say it." Lo Binghe nervously glanced around at Shen Qingqiu out of the corner of his eye and quietly said, "I'd like to be addressed in the way married couples normally address each other." "Master Shin, did you hear that?" Shang Xinghua asked instantly. Shizzy wants you to address him like you're married. "Husband, hubby, honey, you can choose one." "You shut up," said Shin Qingqiu. "If you were to compare your partner to an animal, what would they be?" Without thinking, Lo Binghe said, "A white crane." "I can't think of an animal," Shin Qingqiu said, "but I do have a plant, a black lotus." Lo Binghe didn't understand. "Well, Shizun, do lotuses come in black too?" "If you were giving your partner a present, what would you choose, and what present would you yourself like?" "As long as Shizun says the words, I will give him anything he desires." "I don't think there's anything I particularly want," Shin Qingqiu said honestly. As a Peak Lord, there really didn't seem to be anything that was hard for him to get, and when he thought about it, it really did feel like he was sitting on top of a mountain of gold and letting it go to waste. "Then I want Shizun to ignore everyone else and stay by my side for 3 days." Shang Qinghua licked the tip of the brush and muttered, "Well, why not just have him stay by your side for a lifetime?" Lo Binghe shook his head. "Well, then Shizun would be unhappy." At the sight of his dejected appearance, like that of a grumbling woman, Shang Qingqiu was tongue-tied with shock. Conversely, Shen Qingqiu was completely calm. Or Shang Qinghua was tongue-tied. Conversely, Shen Qingqiu was completely calm. "Well, silly child, you're thinking wild thoughts again. Why would this master be unhappy?" "How far is your..." Okay, now that part there, I'm like... that does bother me a little bit because I'm like, clearly Shin Qingqiu does like being around other people. And at least Lo Binghe was like, well, he doesn't want to be with me all the time. And I'm like, right, correct. I'm like, don't try to guilt trip him. "How far has your relationship progressed?" "We've done all the things we should have and some things we shouldn't," said Shin Qingqiu. "Why are there things we shouldn't have done?" Lo Binghe asked, hurt. "Does Shizun feel that we shouldn't have done it?" "No. If we really shouldn't have done it, this master wouldn't have let you do it." "Well, where was your first date?" "Huanhua Palace Water Prison," said Lo Binghe. Shang Qinghua was silent, and Shin Qingqiu was equally silent. "Binghe, you call that a date?" "What was the mood between you at the time?" "Not very good," said Lo Binghe. That was something that couldn't be described as merely not very good. "Where do your dates often take place?" Shin Qingqiu rested his chin on his hand. "The moment I open my eyes, I see him. And when I close my eyes, he's still the one I see in my dreams." "Does that mean we're on dates all the time?" I do think it's kind of funny because when he says, "when I see him in my dreams," Lo Binghe controls the dream realm, so it's kind of funny in cheek and tone. Yeah. I do want to go back up there. I think that the idea of, there are things that we shouldn't have done. Again, I'm kind of baffled that Lo Binghe can't process that some of the things that happened in chapter 89 might not have been a good thing. I'm kind of like, that's one of my things that Lo Binghe kind of bothers me about his character. He's kind of dumb. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And I'm sorry if that sounds mean, but like, he is kind of dumb. He's kind of a himbo. And I'm like, do you not, I like want to do the blinking meme where I'm like, do you not get it, sweetheart? I'm like, and I hate to be condescending like that, but like Lan Wangji is smart and Hua Chong is smart. And Hua Chong is like street smarts and Lan Wangji is like book smart. Like they're both smart in different ways. And then there's Lo Binghe who's like, he tries. And I'm just like, I value intelligence in a partner a lot. Like a partner has to be smart. They have to be intelligent. And Lo Binghe, he just kind of misses the mark. And I would be sitting on a couch looking at him going, well, at least he's pretty, you know? Like, and that's so crazy. And I hate to be condescending and mean like that, but like I had a friend and she had a boyfriend and she literally only dated him because he was really cute, but he was dumb. And we went, and I don't mean to be mean, but we went on like, I went on a date, like they were going out to dinner and they asked me to be like the third wheel. So I went along and we had this conversation and I could not talk to him because you couldn't strike up a conversation. There was nothing to talk about. He was just like, huh? And I was like, can you talk about anything? Like remotely? Like, and but he was cute. He gave her a puppy. So she got a dog out of it. But anyway, I'm like, come on, Lo Bing-hei, be a little smarter, sweetheart. Like, anyway. So, does Shizun find it annoying? Lo Bing-hei asked cautiously. Shen Jiu rubbed his back. No, you're just overthinking. I do like that Shen Jiu says that. He's like, I see him all the time. But Shen Jiu is kind of a little grumpy about it anyway. And he's kind of tsundere about it. And so when Lo Bing-hei is like, well, is that a problem? He's like, no, don't overthink it. It's just me saying it. Shang Qinghua thought that dating Bing Mei sounded really fucking exhausting. It had only been a couple of questions, but Master Shen had already soothed him 3 times. This glass heart kept shattering and getting glued back together. Exactly when would it end? Fucking annoying. Shang Qinghua, you're the one that wrote him that way. Oh my God. I never thought that I would agree with Shang Qinghua so much, but fucking exhausting is exactly the terminology I would use to describe him. Oh my God. Shen Jiu is basically a kindergarten teacher taking care of a kid. Again, that's probably my biggest hurdle at this point with their relationship, is that I want Lo Bing-hei to be an adult. And he is acting so much like a child that Shen Jiu has to take care of. And I'm like, just because you got a massive dick doesn't mean that you get excused from being a kid. So it's like, who was the first to confess? Me, said Lo Bing-hei. Of course it was him, said Shen Jiu. What things does your partner do that make you feel helpless? Shen Jiu shrugged and said weakly, well, whenever he starts to cry, there's nothing I can do. Whenever Shizun gets mad, I'm unable to do anything. Shang Qinghua hummed in acknowledgement, bouncing his leg. He wrote it down while roasting them in his heart. They are exactly like a kindergartner and his teacher. When you're together, what makes your heart race the most? When he pats my head and gives me instructions, Lo Bing-hei said earnestly. When he tearfully begs me for something, said Shen Jiu. Lo Bing-hei went on, and also when he scolds me and hits me. He was acting awfully Twitter-pated, but Shen Jiu was already very used to this. Shang Qinghua silently added a note beside Lo Bing-hei's name. A hopeless masochist, beyond cure. Have you lied to your partner before? Are you good at lying? Right after this question, he confidently wrote the words, big fat liar, after Lo Bing-hei's name. Yes, said Lo Bing-hei, but never again. Have you fought before? What kind of fights were they? Shen Jiu said, we fought a lot, and terribly too. Thinking about it now, I don't know why we did. It could have all been avoided. Why do you keep asking these kinds of questions? Lo Bing-hei asked angrily. You're making Shizun unhappy for no reason. Shang Qinghua shrugged. My bad. How did you make up afterwards? Shen Jiu waved his hand. We boned to save the world. Because he knows that Shang Qinghua knows this. Is your relationship publicly known or secret? Have you ever heard of the regret of Chun Shan? Shen Jiu shot back. The questions after that were on a free fall in terms of degeneracy. Shang Qinghua cleared his throat. Are you the top or bottom? Lo Bing-hei was uncomprehending. What does that mean? While Lo Bing-hei genuinely didn't understand. How, buddy, do you not understand? Shen Jiu pretended not to. He waved his fan. Who knows what it means? Pass, pass, pass. How did you decide that? Shen Jiu thought for a bit. I really don't know. Somehow it just happened that way, probably because he looked pitiful. Lo Bing-hei was perplexed. I still don't know what he's asking. Shen Jiu patted the top of his head. It's all right if you don't understand, he said earnestly. You're not at a disadvantage in any way. Where did you have your first time? Shen Jiu was about to answer when Lo Bing-hei barged in. Qijing Peak. Lo Bing-hei once again barged in. Qijing Peak, the bamboo house. All right. He'll never acknowledge such a failure for a first time, Shen Jiu thought. Let it be Qijing Peak. There's nothing worth arguing over. Let him answer however he likes. I won't correct him anymore. I don't like the tone of that. That feels kind of like Shen Jiu. I mean, to me in that moment, I feel like maybe Lo Bing-hei didn't really, since he wasn't conscious. I thought Lo Bing-hei's answer there was kind of sincere and sweet, where he's like, I don't want to talk about Maigu Ridge because he wasn't present in the moment because of Jinmo. So he thinks that their time at Qijing Peak is the first time. Of course, Shin Qingqiu had to suffer through all that shit, so he remembers it and is like, I'm not going to correct him anymore. But you can tell he's bitter, like the way that he words that. He's still bitter about it. What were you feeling at the time? Shin Qingqiu was silent. If he were to be honest, it came down to 3 words. Pain, pain, and more pain. But saying this in front of others would embarrass Lo Binghe far too much. Depressed, Lo Binghe said, Shizun was wonderful, but I was completely useless. They are on opposite pages here. I mean, he said Shizun was great, but he was useless, and Shizun's like, I was suffering the entire time. Those narratives don't exactly match up. You all might want to talk about that, maybe amongst each other. The morning after your first night, what was the first thing you said? Shizun, breakfast is ready. Don't say anything else until you put your clothes on first. How many times do you do it in a month? These are really personal questions. Shin Qingqiu thought that this was beyond ridiculous. Who's bored enough to count something like that? Also, why have the questions been consistently moving into such a strange direction? Roughly speaking, once every 3 days, Lo Binghe said seriously. If Shizun is happy, sometimes he'll let me touch him after only 2. Shang Qinghua chewed on the brush shaft, jotting down the records while muttering, this is unscientific. According to the way I wrote him, even if he did it from the beginning of the month all the way to the end without taking a break, it shouldn't be a problem. Then under normal circumstances, where do you get intimate? He has an obsession with the bamboo house, says Shin Qingqiu. Lo Binghe smiled brightly while nodding. And where do you want to try bleeping the most? If we're doing it anyway, what does it matter where we're doing it, said Shin Qingqiu. Bison Peak, said Lo Binghe evenly. The room fell silent. The Bison Peak training grounds, Lo Binghe said calmly. The fuck? thought Shin Qingqiu. Is it your life that you don't care about your face? Thought Shang Qinghua. What sort of agreements do you have about bleeping? Does he want to do it with Shin Qingqiu in front of Liu Qingge to like show him that he can't get with Shin Qingqiu? What the fudge? If it hurts, he has to tell me, said Lo Binghe. He absolutely has to. No crying allowed, said Shin Qingqiu. Say, have you guys misunderstood the implication behind the word agreement? Asked Shin Qinghua. If you can't have a person's heart, then you should at least have their body. Do you approve or disapprove of this line of thinking? That's a loser's, a degenerate's take on things, Shin Qingqiu said contemptuously. Without the heart, what use is the body? Lo Binghe asked. All right, fair. Shang Qinghua thought sadly about how under his pen, Lo Binghe had been obviously been a peerless stallion who'd pursued only his desire to fuck, and the number of women that he raped had been in the double digits. He'd known that Lo Binghe in this strange world had turned gay, but exactly how had he fallen step by step to this point? If your partner was assaulted by a thug, what would you do? Asked Shang Qinghua. This question was way too surreal. Shin Qingqiu was speechless for a long time until he said, who would be stupid enough to rape him? Even if you were trying to die, at least look for a better way to do it. Lo Binghe rolled up his sleeves and then said in a leisurely manner, I'd turn them into a human swine and throw them into the endless abyss. And then I'd think of some other methods by which to slowly punish them and play with them for 10 years before finally killing them. If a good friend... I like that we just immediately went on to the next question. Like, these questions are so bizarre. If a good friend said to you, I'm very lonely, so just for tonight, would you... and asked to be intimate, would you agree? I don't have such shameless friends, Lo Binghe said indifferently. I don't need friends. Head lowered, Shin Qingqiu scraped at the tea leaves in his cup and then took a sip. I also don't have such friends. That's kind of sad. Really? Lo Binghe said doubtfully. Liu Shishu wouldn't say that kind of thing. Tea sprayed all over the floor. Shang Qinghua, who had had his upper body sprayed with tea, had gone to change his clothes and returned, and now continued his question. Do you think you're good at sex? What about your partner? Shen Jingzhou let out a dry laugh, and Lo Binghe looked on the verge of tears. Shen Jingzhou saw his melancholic expression, miserable beyond words, and pity filled his heart. He turned back towards Shang Qinghua and said angrily, "Isn't it obvious that this is a sensitive topic? Pass." So I guess Lo Binghe is not good at sex. I guess he is not good at all. And Shang Qinghua is like, just get on with it. Get out. Go. I don't like the way that Shen Jingzhou said he didn't have friends. Why can't he have friends? Why can't he just say he has friends, but he wouldn't do that because he's in a relationship with Lo Binghe? What answers are these? Stop. Okay. Shang Qinghua picked at his ear. Okay, it's my bad. Are you interested in S&M? What is that, Shizun? Why are there more and more things I don't understand? Oh, he's asking whether you like hitting or like me hitting or scolding you, or if you would feel anything if I pricked you with a needle or burned you with a flame, said Shen Jingzhou. Lo Binghe looked a little bashful and then said softly, well, as long as it's Shizun, how could this disciple dislike it? Shang Qinghua understood. He picked up a pen and with flourish wrote, Lo Binghe has great interest in S&M. What's the most agonizing thing about sex? He's too small, said Lo Binghe. He's too big, said Shen Jingzhou. Shang Qinghua silently swore at this master and disciple, calling them shameless, and then wrote in another flourish, go figure it out yourselves. Has the bottom ever actively tried to seduce the top? Shen Jingzhou pointed at himself. Me? Do I look like that kind of person? It's hard to say because you looked pretty straight. Shang Qinghua murmured, where do you like being kissed? Lo Binghe said forehead, fingertips, lips, everywhere. Honestly, this child can't kiss, Shen Jingzhou said helplessly. He only knows how to bite. What's the best way to please your partner during? Praise him for improving, said Shen Jingzhou. Not crying, said Lo Binghe. Shang Qinghua's brush flew like the wind, and he absentmindedly added another line. Master Shen's standards are so low. Right? Oh my God. And I know some people in the comments will be like, but it's so realistic. But no. These people need to they need to go to can Shang Qinghua, can he write in the story like a sex therapist or something? Because this is really sad. And it's really kind of pitiful, if I'm being honest. What do you think about at those times? Who issued this questionnaire? Asked Shen Jingzhou. Do they have any experience at all? At that kind of time, your mind is utterly blank. What else can you think about? Do you remove your own clothes, or does your partner help remove them for you? If I let him do it, I wouldn't have many clothes left to wear, Shen Jingzhou said. Shizun, how can I control my strengths at a time like that? Lo Binghe said defensively. Again, Lo Binghe, sweetheart. You're a full-blown adult. When Shen Jingzhou's like, I'd really like to have friends. I'd really like to keep my clothes good. Get better. How many times in one night? How many times? Shen Jingzhou asked. No, I mean, do people really make a point to count that? Shang Qinghua turned the page, ready to keep asking. But Lo Binghe had long since lost his patience and smiled coldly. If you want to know that much, I'll count today. And tell Shang Shishu later. That will do. Last question. Really, it's the last one. What do you most want to say to your partner? Master and disciple glanced at each other. Shen Jingzhou waved his fan. We're done here, Binghe. Let's go home and eat. All right, Lo Binghe said obediently. He wrapped an arm around Shen Jingzhou's shoulder and then kicked open the door and left. A strong wind gusted into the room, blowing over the pile of questionnaire sheets that Shang Qinghua had just completed until they drifted all over the floor. Shang Qinghua's lips still twitched uncontrollably. He squatted down and picked up a couple sheets, but after some time he suddenly fell to his knees. Cucumber bro, you scam artist. That's definitely not what you want most to say to your partner. My quest, master system, please don't deduct points so quickly. There's only one question that didn't get answered. Cucumber bro, you fucker! Oh my God. Okay. All right. I want to go ahead and talk about this chapter since they are so far apart, 93 and 94. I mean, there are parts of this little chapter here that I'm glad they do a questionnaire and they do it between the two of them. I'm glad they do. And there are some answers that were really sweet on Lo Binghei's part, that did show he does, like, you can't fault Lo Binghei for loving Shen Jiu. Like, he clearly loves him and he'll do anything for him, right? But I'm going to make another case in point, because I had a lot of people in the comments. I feel like there's a spectrum. Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian kind of fall in the middle. People that are okay with them, they kind of like, I feel like they're kind of like the middle ground, and Heaven Official's Blessing and Scum Villain are on very different spectrums. One is the longest story that has the most romance, that has the most communication, healthiness, things like that. And this one's more chaos, more concept. It's short, fast, and furious, but it's also toxic and unhealthy. So you have two different stories that are very different types, and your readers are going to probably gravitate towards one more than the other. And Modao Zushi kind of is like a middle point, right? And we don't know what her fourth story will be like. I definitely feel, as far as the romance goes, I gravitate towards Heaven Official's Blessing, because it's a healthier relationship and it's more romantic, it's more communicative, it feels more mature, which would make sense because MXTX was more mature when she wrote it. With this, there are parts where I'm going to use Hua Chong as an example. Even though Hua Chong worships the ground that Shilian walks on and will do, like Lo Binghei, anything for him. Shilian can do no wrong in Hua Chong's eyes. There are parts in Heaven Official's Blessing, in those novels, there are moments where Hua Chong's like, I disagree with you, Shilian, and I don't think you should do that. Or I don't think you should do this because of said reason. Now, does Shilian listen to him all the time? He's like Shen Jiu. He's like, no, I'm going to do my own thing. But I respect Hua Chong because he's mature enough to say, hey, we're in a relationship. I don't think you should do this. And I don't think this is healthy. And can we talk about it? And then him and Shilian talk about it. And Hua Chong acts like an adult, right? Because that's what you do, right? And while Lo Binghei and his undying, unwavering love of Shen Jiu is amazing and I love it, there are parts throughout this interview that I'm like, but Lo Binghei, you also need to, like, you can have parts that you want Shen Jiu to change. And you can, like, tell him, like, you know, he does make a point of saying when they have sex, he wants Shen Jiu to tell him if it hurts. And that, I agree, he should definitely do that. But the overall vibe of the interview, and I know that Shen Jiu, he's very private. He doesn't want to give airplane shooting towards the sky the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't want to give him anything to go off of. So the idea of doing this interview, Shen Jiu's like, I hate this, but I'm going to do it because it's you, whatever. And I get the idea of the system making you do it. Fine. But I definitely got this kind of blasé, kind of like, let's just get through this interview. I don't want to talk about it. And maybe that was one of the reasons why his questions came across the way that they did, because Shen Jiu kind of gives this vibe of, I've just settled for Lo Binghei, and I guess I'm just gonna stick with him, but it's fine. He's nice. I feel bad if I don't. He's not gonna get anybody else, so I might as well just suffer through it. And I don't think he's suffering through it, although their sex sounds terrible. It sounds like they're not good at sex. The part that would get me is when Lo Binghei doesn't kiss him, he bites him. I'd be like, you're not a fucking dog. Like, just use your lips, sweetheart. But them as a couple, I don't get the warm, fuzzy, like vibes from them. I feel like I would love to see this type of chapter. I would love to see, like, Ni Huasong interview Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji. Like, I think that would be hilarious and would be so, like, their kinkery would be like, I feel like Ni Huasong would be like, like blushing as he's writing it down. And I would love to have, like, oh God, you could get, I can't say the character's name because it's a spoiler, but you could get a certain green character to be forced against his will to interview Shilian and Hua Chong. And that would be hilarious. And I feel like that would be so good. Now, granted, I do feel like with Shilian and Hua Chong, their answers would maybe come across as more vanilla. But then if you got into, like, their past and talking about how they knew each other and didn't know each other in certain periods and times, those questions could be fascinating and they could, like, walk through it. And it could also be really funny. Here, it's kind of funny, but I almost felt kind of like Lo Binghei didn't want to be there. He also didn't understand some of the questions. I'm like, aren't you 28? And, like, I'm like, aren't you in your late 20s? Shouldn't you know some of these things? And Shilian was just kind of like, let's just get this over with. So there were parts of this chapter I really liked, and it does show me that they have been together, but it also kind of feels like Shen Qingqiu's just sort of resigned himself to this relationship. Like, the part that was saddest for me was when Shen Qingqiu was like looking at the ground being like, I don't have any friends. And I'm like, but you do have friends. You've had lots of friends. Why are you saying you don't have friends? Is it because your Dumbo boyfriend won't let you have friends? What? Because he's gonna bitch and moan if you do? What? Like, that part just kind of pissed me off. And did this chapter make me want to support Lo Binghe and Shen Qingqiu more? Not really. It makes me feel a little bit better about them, that they are at least, they seem like they're tolerant of one another. It made me feel like, okay, things are better with them, but it still feels like Shen Qingqiu just settled. He just settled. He's like, well, if I don't stay with Lo Binghe, he'll try to destroy the world, and he does love me, even if he's not crazy intelligent and isn't really emotionally mature and kind of is terrible at sex. I've been like, I've been like, well, 3 strikes and you're out, Lo Binghe. I'm gonna go over here to somebody else. But we can be friends. Yeah, I would not date Lo Binghe. He is not the love interest of my dreams. Lan Wangji and Hua Chong, absolutely 100%. And I would date Xi Lian and Wei Wuxian in a heartbeat. Shen Qingqiu, I could work with Shen Qingqiu, but Lo Binghe, no. He's too immature. He's too immature and much like a kid. And I'm like, no, we should just be friends, but I don't want to be sexually involved with you. But okay. So that was chapter 93. All right. We're going to bring Whiteboard Kun out after we get to chapter 94. But chapter 94 is at the beginning of the book on page 60. So let's see what we have with this. And oh, poor Sheng Qinghua. Like, what can we do? All right. Oh! Chapter 24. Part 24. Chapter 94. Oh! Yu Qingyan and Shen Qingqiu. Oh! So, are we going into the past? Is this Shen Qingqiu of the past, or is this Shen Qingqiu of the present? Let's find out. A clatter rang out as Shen Jiu. Oh my god, it is Shen Jiu. Oh, good, we're gonna get more with him. Okay. A clatter rang out as Shen Jiu sent the little black dish flying with a kick. He crossed his arms and said nothing. The youth, who was either Shishi or Shiwu, Shishi means 14, Shiwu means 15, shrank back, while the young boys around him couldn't help but send him encouragement with their eyes. So he steeled himself, put on a brave face to say, Shen Jiu, don't think you can just throw your weight around. You don't own this street. What gives you the right to tell us that we can't stay? This main street was wide and even, and many people came and went upon it. If one wanted to beg, it was the best and prime location. Some of the passerby watched this group of children fight, but even more hurried on their way. And this new brat had the gall to challenge him. Shen Jiu looked down and around, preparing to find a brick with which to teach him a lesson, when a tall youth happened to walk over. He saw Shen Jiu rolling up his sleeves, head lowered, and hastily went to stop him. Zhao Zhu, let's go somewhere else. No, said Shen Jiu, I'm staying here. The first youth took the opportunity to tattle. Oh, Chige, he's bullying me. That wasn't bullying, Shiwu, said Yu Qi. Zhao Zhu was just joking around. Who's joking, said Shen Jiu. I'm telling him to get lost. This is my territory, and I'll kill anyone who tries to steal it. With Yu Qi standing in front of him, Shiwu grew bold. He leaned forward and yelled, well, every time we go find a new place, you always hog the best spot. Everyone's been sick of you for ages. You think you're all that everyone's afraid of you? Shiwu, Yu Qi scolded. Amidst the struggle, Shen Jiu kicked Yu Qi in the shin. If you want a fight, I'll give you one. Only losers would blame their spot for their incompetence. You bastard, who's your Chige? I dare you to say that again. You're the bastard. I bet you'll get sold off as soon and end up a pimp. Yu Qi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Where'd you learn that kind of nonsense language? Then he dragged Shen Jiu off to the side of the road while coaxing him. All right, you're the most competent one here. Even if you didn't pick and choose your spot, you'd be the best, so let's change streets. Shen Jiu stepped on his foot. Get off! Get off of me, like I'm scared. Come on, fight me. Want to gang up on me? Go ahead. Of course, Yuchi knew he wasn't scared. If he really let Shen Jiu brawl with the other kids, he would fight dirty. He'd gouge at their eyes and kick them in the belly or crotch or shin. He was terribly vicious, and the other party would be the one to end up suffering and bawling in terror. Yuchi forced down a smile. Are you done stepping on my foot yet? If you are, stop it. Chige will take you somewhere fun. What shitty fun? Shen Jiu asked savagely. The most fun I'll have is if they're all dead. Yuchi looked at him helplessly and shook his head. With a Chi for 7 and a Jiu for 9, naturally there had also been a 1 through 6. But the previous batch of children, everyone 6 and under, had been sold off or was long dead. Of the children left, these two were the closest. When Shen Jiu had been a little younger, he'd been small and skinny. Yuchi had held his head while they sat on the ground, a letter of blood before them. A letter of blood is a piece of text written using one's own blood as ink, commonly for expressing one's grudges, hatred, mourning, or determination. Written on it was the tale of how all their siblings and parents had died, how they'd stumbled upon hardship while searching for their relatives, and how now they were penniless and alone, drifters without anyone to depend on, etc. According to the orders given to them, Yuchi should have wailed and wept, but no matter what, he could never manage to cry. Therefore, this task had instead fallen to Shen Jiu, even though he was faking an illness that supposedly left him too feeble to weep. But he was small and his face wasn't too unsightly to look at, so whenever he sobbed and bawled, the passerby found him pitiful and generously opened their wallets. It would have been no exaggeration to call him a money tree. Eventually, Yuchi gradually grew older, and he became less and less willing to do this kind of thing, so he'd been relegated to patrolling and keeping a lookout. Shen Jiu had wanted to go with him, but had been forbidden to do so. Therefore, he continued to terrorize the streets, a scourge to everyone in his path. As the pair were about to head away from the most prosperous street in town, there suddenly came the sound of thundering hooves. Stall owners on both sides of the streets paled in a panic. Those with carts pushed them away, while others ran as if their mortal enemy approached. Yuchi didn't understand the reason for this, but Shen Jiu had just dragged him to the roadside when a gigantic horse turned onto the street. I wonder if this is the Chu family. The horse's bit was forged from pure gold, heavy and solid, gleaming and bright. Haughtily riding astride the beast was a spirited and youthful young master. His face was fair and striking, his brows and eyes slender. Where the light struck his dark irises, 2 brilliant pinpoints shone, the effect blindingly piercing. His purple hem fluttered against both sides of his saddle, his narrow sleeves sat snug around his wrists, and in his pale hand he gripped a jet-black whip. Dazzled by the gold, Shen Jiu couldn't help but lean out to look, but Yuchi quickly pulled him backward and the two of them retreated. They hadn't walked for long when they heard a scream and a sound of people scattering. A group of young boys sprinted towards them and pounced on Yuchi one after the other, practically smearing them with their terrified snot and tears. Shen Jiu flew into a rage, but Yuchi hurriedly said, "What's wrong? Why are you crying? Shiwu's gone," someone wailed. Yuchi halted in his tracks. "He didn't follow you?" "There was too much going on," the child bawled. "I couldn't see clearly." "Well, don't panic. Slow down and tell me everything." As it turned out, when that young master on horseback had taken his guards past the street entrance, he'd glanced sideways and spotted Shiwu and the other children on the street corner. "Where are they from?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "They are beggar children, Master Chu," said the guard. "We don't know where they came from." "What are you doing allowing such filthy things to hang about?" "Oh my God." The guard needed no further instruction from their master. They brazenly stalked over to chase the children away. But Shiwu had been unwilling to leave so easily, not after he'd finally managed to snatch away Shen Jiu's territory. He yelled angrily, "What gives you the right to kick us out?" He wanted to finish with, "You don't own this street." But then that youthful young master waved his hand. A dark shadow descended, slashing a bloody whip mark across Shiwu's face. The wound was barely a hair's breadth from his eye. Shiwu had yet to register the pain. He was scared stiff. That youthful young master smiled brightly. "What, right? Not much of one. It's just that my family built this street. Whether from pain or fright, Shiwu collapsed to the ground with a thud. Shen Jiu hadn't finished listening to the tale before he burst into loud laughter, but he soon found himself unable to laugh anymore. Yu Chi did a head count and discovered that some other children were missing as well. He looked back and said, "You should go. I'll come soon." Shen Jiu was full of schadenfreude. "Leave it! Don't go poking your nose into this. That Chu guy doesn't actually have the guts to kill them." Yu Chi shook his head. "You head back. I'm the oldest. I can't leave this alone." "He won't die," Shen Jiu insisted. "At most, he'll just get beaten up. That'll teach him a lesson." "Go back," said Yu Chi. Unable to restrain him, Shen Jiu spat, "Well, you meddle too much." After yelling this, he ran after him. Wow, so before we get to part two, one, Yu Chi, even as a kid, has this stoic, stoic big brother, caring mentality to him, and Shen Jiu is a little shit. Very, very, I kind of get Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe vibes from them, with Shin Qingqiu and Yu Chi kind of matching, and Lo Binghe and Shen Jiu matching, only if Lo Binghe was a little shit. Lo Binghe was an obedient little kid, to his credit. But Shen Jiu, I get why Shen Jiu is like that. He's projecting a lot of his own insecurities. From this last part, you can tell he doesn't want Yu Chi to go, but he doesn't want to admit it. So he's projecting a lot of his own insecurities in the moment. But man, part two. Chu Jianluo thought that Shen Jiu was incredibly fun. Oh, it's not a good way to start this. It was like hitting a dog. If you hit a dog, it would duck its head and cringe, cowering away as it whimpered. Though this reaction posed no threat, it also wasn't very interesting. However, if you stepped on this dog, it would growl low in its throat while staring at you fearfully. But it'd be too afraid to fight back, and that was interesting. He gave Shen Jiu a slap. By now, Shen Jiu had doubtless mentally sworn to fuck the Chu family's graves 118 times, but he could only obediently take these kicks. He even exposed his face for Chu Jianluo to hit. How incredibly fun. As Chu Jianluo thought this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Shen Jiu had just taken a good beating and was currently cowering off to the side. Chu Jianluo practically rolled with laughter as he eyed him. After he'd purchased Shen Jiu, he'd locked him up for a few days, leaving him covered in grime and film. When Chu Jianluo looked at him again, he had been utterly disgusted. So he picked him up, dangling him like a kitten as he walked him over to several heavy-set guards and then told him scrub him clean. Thereafter, Shen Jiu had been given a thorough scrubbing and cleaning to the point that they'd almost scoured off a layer of his skin. Then they'd lugged him back to the study, now that the years of grimes and dust had been boiled off of him, and because they'd pressed too hard when washing his face and arms, his pale skin glowed with a soft flush, while his wet hair still steamed from the bath. Standing off to the side, neatly dressed, he really did cut a rather pitiful figure. Chu Jianluo studied him for a long time with his head cocked. A strange feeling rose in his heart, alongside a dash of fondness. He even held back the kick he'd planned on giving him. "Can you read?" he asked. "I know a couple characters," Shen Jiu said quietly. Chu Jianluo laid out a sheet of snow-white paper and then rapped on the desk. "Try to write them." Shen Jiu reluctantly picked up a wolf hair brush and held it, his grip surprisingly correct. He dipped it in some ink and thought for a moment and then wrote 7. After a pause, he wrote 9. Him and Yu Chi's numbers. Though the direction of the strokes were all wrong, the results were neither crooked nor slanted. Indeed, they were uniform and impeccable. "Where did you learn these?" asked Chu Jianluo. "I watched someone write." This brat knew absolutely fuck all. He only understood how to copy patterns. Yet he'd been able to fool Chu Jianluo, which left him incredibly surprised. Thus, feeling increasingly amiable, he copied the tone of his family's old tutor and praised the boy. "You have some talent. If you put some effort into studying, you too might be able to go places." Chu Jianluo was 16, 4 years older than Shen Jiu, and he bore the weight of all his parents' expectations. Having been raised in a house of golden bricks, he thought everyone was beneath him. The only person he adored, the apple of his eye, was his little sister Haitang. She was the darling of the entire Chu family. Whenever Chu Jianluo was in front of Haitang, he always played the good older brother. In the past, he'd wished his sister would never marry, and now that Shen Jiu was here, he began to hatch an alternative plan. Chu Haitang loves Shen Jiu very much. If Shen Jiu were properly educated, Chu Jianluo could turn him into a brother-in-law on the cheap. That didn't seem bad at all. Then his sister would remain by his side, and he could continue using Shen Jiu for his own amusement. As long as the boy remained honest and obedient, there would be no issues. He's like Ramsay. He's like Ramsay Bolton from Game of Thrones. If Haitang married Shen Jiu, she wouldn't need to leave, and she'd still rely on their family for food, clothes, and money. It would be as good as not marrying her off in the first place. The plan had no flaws other than the fact that matching her with Shen Jiu is a bit like letting a toad get a taste of some sumptuous swan meat. I don't like that analogy. Having calculated his plans to perfection, Chu Jianluo would often give Shen Jiu warnings like, if you dare make Haitang unhappy, I'll make sure to end your sorry life. If not for Haitang, I would have beaten you to death long ago. Humans must understand and repay kindness. Our family gave you the chance to play human. So even if that means repaying us with your life, that's how it should be. The older Shen Jiu grew, the more he understood that this person wouldn't tolerate even the slightest bit of disobedience. His every request was to be obeyed, even if what he heard filled him with an indescribable disgust. He knew he must not express it. Only in this way could he avoid a vicious beating. But within his heart, he still thought back on the first time he'd met Chu Jianluo. That day had been the one and only time he'd driven the young master mad with rage. Yu Qi had insisted on retrieving Shiwu and the other children. Right away, he'd almost collided with the hooves of Chu Jianluo's horse. In that instant, Shen Jiu forgot Yu Qi's warnings, that it would be best not to reveal their rudimentary immortal arts to others. He transformed metal into a sharp blade and stabbed it into the horse straight to the bone. Oh! Oh! Chu Jianluo and the horse spun around in place on the street, the animal rearing and bucking wildly. Shen Jiu silently cursed him to fall off with all his might, to fall and break his neck, but as it happened, Chu Jianluo had outstanding horse riding skills. Even with the horse's forelegs in midair, he remained firmly in the saddle. Who did that? He roared. Who did it? Of course Shen Jiu had done it. But even afterward, when Chu Jianluo came knocking, if Shiwu hadn't taken the initiative to say so, no one would have ever known of Shen Jiu's interference. If they hadn't saved Shiwu, he would have been trampled to death beneath the Chu family hooves. He kept his sorry life only to betray them. Shiwu should have been trampled to death, trampled into mincemeat for thousands to spit upon. Chige should never have gone back to save him. Even if Shiwu had died, it would have served him right. As Shen Jiu suffered through day after day of torment, he turned those sweet and yet futile thoughts over and over again in his mind, drawing strength and comfort from them. And he waited for a certain someone to keep his promise to rescue him from this sea of suffering. So around this time, for part 2, we've already had the flashback where we found out that Chige, that Yu Qingyan, was going away and he didn't come back. So that's where we're at. Oh my God. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about this. This chapter is crazy. Shen Jiu thought a lot about why Yu Qi never returned to look for him. Perhaps he'd been discovered while making his escape and the human traffickers had broke his legs. Perhaps he had been unable to find any food on his journey and, being unwilling to beg, he'd starved to death. Perhaps his potential had been too meager, so none of the immortal mountains had been willing to take him in. Shen Jiu even imagined walking to the ends of the earth looking for Yu Qi's remains, and how after finding them he would dig him a grave with his own 2 hands. Perhaps he would even do his best to shed his tear. Or, if Yu Qi was fortunate enough to be still alive, Shen Jiu imagined how he himself would cast away everything to rescue Yu Qi from whatever hellish straits he'd fallen into. Even though Shen Jiu himself had only gone from the wolf's den to the tiger's lair and was in dire straits himself. But no matter what, he could never have imagined this kind of reunion. He raised and lowered his sword again and again, sending blood splattering everywhere in a horrifying tableau. Flecks of blood splashed into his eyes, but he only blinked a few times and otherwise wore no expression. One could have described his movements as deft and composed. After taking him from Chu Manor, the most Wu Yanzi had thought this disciple of his were like... After taking him from Chu Manor, the most Wu Yanji had taught this disciple of his were things like murder and arson, stealth and robbery, and how to profit from chaos. For example, what he was doing now, using the Immortal Alliance conference to loot the bodies of some foolish, immature rich children who had thought themselves elite cultivators, divesting themselves of their storage pouches and disposing of their corpses. Oh my God! So now we've jumped forward to the Immortal Alliance conference in the OG novel, and Shen Jiu is killing all these people during it. When Yu Qi discovered him, he must have been stunned frozen by Shen Jiu's ghastly appearance, for he didn't even register the disciples' bodies on the ground, and instead took 2 steps towards him. Shen Jiu shivered and abruptly looked up. The moment Yu Qi got a clear look at his face, both of them paled into a bloodless white. Or maybe this is before he becomes Shen Jiu, when he's just at the Immortal Alliance conference. Okay. After he had escaped, right? Stay away, Shen Jiu yelled. Unexpectedly, his first reaction was to throw himself to the ground, snatch an emergency firework from one of the bodies, and release it into the sky. Yu Qi was shaken but still confused. He walked towards Shen Jiu while extending his hand, opening his mouth to say, at which point a disturbing chortle emerged from the dense forest behind them. My dear disciple, who is he? He scared you so terribly. So you do know what it is to be afraid. Shen Jiu released his grip and the firework casing fell soundlessly to the ground. He hastily turned around. Shifu, I'm not afraid of him. I made a mistake just now. I wasn't paying proper attention, which gave this lot on the ground the chance to release a firework. What I'm afraid of is that someone will show up soon. Yu Qi had realized the situation was incredibly dangerous. Without batting an eyelid, he began to gather spiritual energy. Wu Yanji humphed. When I saw that firework, I guessed that was the case. You've always been quick and nimble. What happened this time? If they were going to set off fireworks, why didn't you chop off their hands? Shen Jiu lowered his head. It's all this disciple's fault. We should go at once. If those old men get here, we won't be able to leave even if we try. But Yu Qi moved to block them, raising the sword in his hand. He glanced at Shen Jiu with faintly reddened eyes, his voice hoarse but unusually resolute. I can't let you leave. Furious, Shen Jiu glared at him. Wu Yanji looked him up and down and then gave his sword the same once over. He scoffed, from Sangjiang Mountain and even Shijiang Peak. The Shanzu sword, Yu Qingyan. At this, Shen Jiu startled, then swiftly returned to his urging. Shifu, since he's from Sangjiang Mountain, we won't be able to kill him swiftly. It would be better for us to escape and fast. Once everyone arrives, we'll be finished. Wu Yanji sneered. Sangjiang Mountain may possess grand prestige, but I need not stoop so far as to fear a junior cultivator. Besides, he came seeking death himself. I can't believe they don't know who each other is. Oh my God. As he and Yu Qi came truly to blows, Shen Jiu realized that his worry for Yu Qi, together with his various clumsy tricks he'd used because of it, were rather laughable. He was terrified of that master of his, Wu Yanji. Terrified to death, even. But as Yu Qi, or Yu Qingyan, met him in combat, he proved to be more than Wu Yanji's equal, even without drawing his sword. Nevertheless, Shen Jiu couldn't relax completely. He was all too familiar with Wu Yanji's fighting style and last resort trump cards. Wu Yanji had a set of cursed black light talismans. Countless times, Shen Jiu had witnessed Wu Yanji toss out these paper talismans when at a disadvantage and score a kill by catching his opponent off guard. More than one famous cultivator had failed to escape this sinister maneuver. Moreover, it was easy to see that as he was now, Yu Qi had little experience fighting enemies. His movements were by the book and methodically attacked and parried in turns. Therefore, right when Wu Yanji was about to throw a talisman, Shen Jiu stabbed a sword through his back. Yu Qi grabbed his hand and frantically sprinted away. Having gone through a fierce battle, both youths were in shock. They leaned against a tree, panting heavily. Once he'd calmed down, Shen Jiu finally gave Yu Qi a long, thorough look. His cultivation was extraordinary, and his bearing poised and steady. His clothes weren't that of the common make either, and his demeanor was exactly like that of the great masters themselves. He couldn't have been further from the hellish straits Shen Jiu had imagined. So he did. This was not Yu Qi, but Yu Qingyan. So he does know that. So he knows that Yu Qi. He knows Yu Qingyan is Yu Qi, and he just stabbed his master in the back to run off with him into the woods after he killed all of these people at the Immortal Alliance conference. What? Yu Qingyan looked excited. His face flushed as he prepared to speak. But Shen Jiu opened fire first. You joined Sangjiang Mountain? Shen Jiu couldn't tell what Yu Qingyan was thinking, but the excitement on his face faded a little. Indeed, his complexion paled. You've become Shangding Peak's head disciple. Not bad, said Shen Jiu. Why didn't you come back to look for me? Shen Jiu waited for some time, but the next words never came. So he said, why aren't you saying anything? I'm still waiting. I've already waited so many years after all. Waiting a little longer will be nothing. But how could Yu Qingyan say anything? Shen Jiu crossed his arms. Finally, his waiting was rewarded with Yu Qingyan's quiet words. Sorry, it's Chige who let you down. Ice-cold fury crawled up inside Shen Jiu, engulfing his entire heart. His mouth and nose seemed to fill with the taste of his frenzied, raging blood. First, he'd been a rat forced to swallow its anger, cringing while awaiting more beatings. Then he became a gutter rat, scurrying back and forth as everyone chased and hid it. No matter how he changed, he was a rat, cowering with its tail tucked between its legs, unable to see the light, letting years slip by in vain, squandering its life and time. Meanwhile, Yu Qingyan was a true phoenix that had flown to the summit, a carp that had leapt over the dragon's gate. Sorry. All you've ever known to do is say sorry, Shen Jiu sneered, and then delivered the final ringing blow. It's utterly useless. Some people were rotten from birth. Shen Jiu thought of himself in exactly this way. Someone vile and poisonous from the start. But at that instant he came to a crystal clear realization. That he'd rather have met a Yu Qi who died in some unknown corner, his remains unsightly and forgotten, than a Yu Qingyan who was elegant and powerful, his prospects and future boundless. Part 4. Oh my God! Oh! Why did you not go back for him, Yu Qingyan? Shen Jiu hated far too many people and far too many things. Obviously, people found it hard to say anything good about the character of someone who hated everything. So fortunately, by the time he became Shen Qingqiu, he understood he ought to at least keep that hatred from bubbling to the surface. Within Sangjiang Mountain, the one he absolutely hated, undoubtedly hated the most, was Liu Qingge. Liu Qingge had achieved success in his youth, and his talents were extraordinary, his spiritual energy vast, and his swordplay awe-inspiring. His family background was excellent, and both of his parents were alive. Any of those things would have been enough to make Shen Qingqiu gnash his teeth and toss and turn for 3 days and 3 nights, let alone all of them together in one person. During Sangjiang Mountain's annual martial arts tournament, Shen Qingqiu's opponent had been Liu Qingge. Naturally, the conclusion had been an overwhelming loss on his part. There was no shame in losing to the future Bison Peak Lord, or perhaps one could say that is how it should have been, that it was normal. But Shen Qingqiu would absolutely never think such things. What he saw wasn't the bystanders' amazement and how he'd valiantly held out for so long, but Liu Qingge's matter-of-fact arrogance had as he held the point of Qing Lan's blade inches from his throat. Qi Jinping prided itself on being the gentleman's peak, and Shen Qingqiu took to playing a gentleman like a fish to water. Yet Liu Qingge was always able to make his rage boil to the surface, to the point that he didn't bother wasting energy playing nice with his sex sibling. The thing Shen Qingqiu most often said to Liu Qingge was, "Liu Qingge, I'll definitely kill you one day." In this particular instance, the tender young lady carrying the pipa had long since thrown her thin robes and dashed out in terror. Liu Qingge sent him a glance. You kill me? It was only 3 words. But Shen Qingqiu heard boundless venom within them. His wrist turned. Liu Qingyang saw that the situation didn't look good and pressed Shen Qingqiu's elbow downward, preventing him from drawing his sword. He looked back and yelled, Liu Shidi, you should head back. Liu Qingge looked like he couldn't be bothered to deal with this further. With a cold laugh, his figure instantly vanished. This left only the 2 of them inside the warm red pavilion. One person's clothes were mussed and disheveled, while the others had not a thread out of place. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Yu Qingyang yanked Shen Qingqiu off the bed. He was in a rare fit of anger. Why are you like this? Why am I like what? Asked Shen Qingqiu. 2 of Sangjiang Mountain's head disciples getting into a huge brawl inside a brothel. Does that sound good to you? If you don't tell them, and I don't either, well, who'd know what sect we're from? Shen Qingqiu countered. Sangjiang Mountain is Sangjiang Mountain. Tell me, which part of Sangjiang Mountain's rules decrees that its disciples can't visit this place? Sangjiang Mountain isn't a Buddhist monastery or a Taoist temple. They might be able to control everything else, but they can't stop me for looking for women. If Xizang finds it shameful, he should watch that mouth of Liu Qingge's. Indeed, Sangjiang Mountain never expressly ordained such a rule, but cultivators were supposed to naturally understand the concept of preserving a pure heart and nature, of exercising self-discipline, especially those of Xizang Peak, where the Peak lords and disciples had invariably remained virtuous and unsullied. Instead, this unwritten consensus had become Shen Qingqiu's justification for sophistry. Rendered speechless, Yu Qingyang spent some time swallowing his words before giving a muted response. I won't say anything. Liu Shidi and the others won't say anything either. No one will know. Then I must thank you both, says Shen Qingqiu as he put on his shoes. Lusting after women damages one's cultivation, said Yu Qingyang. Shen Qingqiu sneered. Didn't you hear your Liu Shidi's tone with those words of his? You kill me with your abilities? Damaged or not, they are as they are. Yu Qingyang was silent for a moment. Liu Shidi isn't really such a bad person. He's like that with everyone, not just to you. Shen Qingqiu scoffed. Like that with everyone? Don't try to deceive me. Zhangmin Xizang, is he like that with you? If you extend him a single share of kindness, he'll return it 2-fold, Yu Qingyang said patiently. Zhangmin Xizang is truly considerate and understanding. It's just, why doesn't he extend kindness to me first? Why not have pity on me? Show me some compassion. Why must I accommodate him? As Shen Qingqiu had turned a deaf ear to his every plea, Yu Qingyang found it difficult to speak further. After all, he couldn't straight up tell something like, if you hadn't used every means to ambush Liu Qingge after the meet in order to teach him a lesson, the 2 of you wouldn't fly into a rage at the slightest contact now, nor would you loathe the mere sight of each other. Shen Qingqiu yanked his clothes over his shoulder with a jerk of his hand, and then slid Zhuya into its sheath. After taking 2 steps, he thought of something and turned around to inquire, How did you know to find me here? Who reported it to you? I went to Xizang Peak, but I didn't see you, said Yu Qingyang. Then I saw a few Shidi from Baizan Peak preparing to head there. Preparing to head there for what? Yu Qingyang fell silent. Shen Qingqiu sneered. Preparing to gang up on me, is that right? Though conflict often erupted between Shen Qingqiu and Baizan Peak, the conflict this time was truly overblown. A Baizan Peak disciple had gone to this small remote town for a task, where he just happened to see a familiar person enter the largest brothel in the area, the warm red pavilion. From top to bottom, Baizan Peak felt the same as Liu Qingge. None of them harbored any goodwill towards Shen Qingqiu. Therefore, the disciple had obviously refused to let this chance pass by. He directly followed Shen Qingqiu into the brothel and then mocked him for being a hypocrite and actually entering this sort of place, saying that he'd lost face for the entire sect. After a couple of undiplomatic words, Shen Qingqiu had beaten him severely, leaving him with serious injuries. When this disciple returned to Baizan Peak, he'd run into Liu Qingge, and after questioning him, Liu Qingge had been steaming with rage, and he promptly rushed over on his sword for payback, ready to hit Shen Qingqiu back for every blow. If Yu Qingyan hadn't caught Baizon Peak's junior disciples in their preparations to head over to the Qijing Peak and dismantle Shen Qingqiu's bamboo lodgings, there's no telling what wreckage this little town would have suffered. Noting how Yu Qingyan refused to speak, Shen Qingqiu could guess the situation, if Baizon Peak ever had any good intentions. So he changed the topic. Why do you go to Qijing Peak? Didn't I tell you not to come looking for me? I just wanted to see how you were doing, said Yu Qingyan. I've troubled you, Xizhang, said Shen Qingqiu. I'm doing very well. I might be hateful. I might be a hateful thing to most people, but luckily the Qijing Peak Lord doesn't despise me. If you truly are doing well, why do you never spend the night on Qijing Peak? Yu Qingyan asked, following on his heels. Shen Qingqiu gave him a dark look. He knew that Yu Qingyan must be thinking that he was being excluded by the rest of Qijing Peak. Yu Qingyang's guess wasn't unreasonable, but he was genuinely wrong this time. Though Shen Qingqiu was unpopular amongst his peers, it wasn't to the extent of being kicked out of the communal sleeping quarters. He just loathed being in close quarters with those of the same sex. All those years, whenever one of his beatings from Chao Zhanlu was over, or whenever he had a premonition of another beating, he had crawled to Chu Haitang's room and remained there quivering. As Chu Zhanlu was unwilling to let his sister see the side of him that was perverse and lunatic, that had been the only place where Shen Jiu could hide. And even longer ago, there had been some girl in the group, their big sis. But after she reached a certain age, that big sis had been sold to a withered old man to be his second wife. Afterward, they'd left the city and they'd never see her again. Liking women wasn't the least bit shameful, but treating women like saviors, cowering within their embrace and seeking courage from them, even without anyone saying it, Shen Qingqiu knew that was horrendously shameful. So even if it meant his death, he would never tell anyone, least of all Yu Qingyan. I don't think that that's shameful, but okay. If I said I wasn't doing well at Qijing Peak, what would you do? Shen Qingqiu asked, slow and measured. Would you help me enter Shangding Peak, just as you recommended me for Qijing? Yu Qingyan gave it some thought and then said solemnly, if that's what you wanted. Clearly I don't want that. Shen Qingqiu said with a resolute humph, I want to be a head disciple. Would you be willing to give me your position? Let me become the sect leader. He asked forcefully and lofty. For better or worse, Qijing Peak's ranks second in the 12 peaks. I'd rather wait to succeed this one. Yu Qingyan sighed, Xiaozhu, why must you always act like this? When he heard that name, Shen Qingqiu's entire back shuddered with an incomparable irritation. Don't call me that. Among his Qing generation peers, Shen Jiu stood out as sharp and resourceful, so the Peak Lord was quite fond of him. He hadn't been around for long, nor was his foundation up to par with his peers, yet he'd been designated as the successor. Once the Peak Lord gave their head disciple new names, their original ones would be discarded. In the past, Chu Zhanlu had forced Shen Jiu to learn to read and write. Shen Jiu had been unwilling to learn, had detested it to the point of madness, yet now it was only through his abilities in reading and studying, through being smarter than his peers, they'd been able to earn the Qijing Peak Lord's favor. To make it even more laughable, of the thousands of possible names in this world, the Peak Lord had just happened to name him Qingqiu. But no matter how laughable, no matter how much it made him gnash his teeth, Shen Qingqiu still wanted that name. For that name represented that from now onward a shining new life was his. Shen Qingqiu gathered his thoughts and smiled happily. That name irritates me whenever I hear it. I've long forgotten it. So please, Zhe Mingxiang, you should also discard it. Yu Qingyan said, then the day you respond to it would be the day it no longer irritates you? A pause. Shen Qingqiu sneered, that will never happen. Yu Qingyan, allow me to say it once more. Never let me hear that name ever again. This is so good! This is so good! Oh my God! This is so good! Oh my God! Okay, this is really good, but yeah, part 5. Shen Qingqiu finally couldn't take it any longer. He headed to Shangding Peak. When it came to Xiangding Peak, Shen Jiu always tried to visit as little as possible, and when it came to Yu Qingyang, he always tried to see him as little as possible too. Therefore, the 12 Peaks annual martial arts tournament was terribly troublesome for him. Sangjiang Mountain's 12 peaks had a fixed ranking. This ranking was unrelated to the strength of each peak. Instead, it had been designated back when Sangjiang Mountain's first generation of peak lords had established themselves. All successive peak lords had addressed each other in accordance with this ranking, rather than by their order of entry into the sect. Therefore, even though he'd entered the sect quite some time after Liu Qingge, because Qijing Peak was ranked second only below Xiangding Peak, while Baizan Peak was ranked 7th, Liu Qingge still had to address Shen Jiu as Shizhong, even if through gritted teeth. At the same time, because of this rating, Xiangding Peak and Qijing Peak disciples were customarily positioned such that their squadrons neighbored each other, and on top of that, their head disciples had to stand side by side. Yu Qingyang was unable to catch Shen Jiu at other times, so he would latch onto those opportunities to ask him all sorts of questions. He chattered nonstop as he inquired after important items like how his cultivation and studies were going, as well as trivial matters like whether he had ample food or clothing, or whether he was cold or warm. Though Shen Jiu found this unbearably annoying, he wasn't stupid enough to embarrass the sect's head disciple before such a large audience. For every 20 questions Yu Qingyang asked, he replied once, maintaining his distance and courtesy both, while ruminating over the techniques from his studies the night prior and contemplating other things. This was the martial arts tournament's most comical scene every year. Perhaps the two of them didn't realize it, but for many disciples, watching these two head disciples was the only fun that was to be had during the Peak Lord's tedious pre-meet speeches. They'd watch one party act unlike himself, ignoring the silence as he murmured and whispered, while the other party absent-mindedly stared straight ahead, hemming and hawing. Therefore, Shen Jiu's decision to voluntarily come to Xiangding Peak not only surprised and pleased Yu Qingyang, but practically all the disciples at the scene were jumping over themselves, banging gongs as they yelled and drums as they yelled for everyone to come watch. Shen Jiu didn't have much to say. He had no interest in playing the circus monkeys for others. He applied for permission to cultivate in the Lingqi caves and then left immediately afterwards. Isolated from the outside world, the Lingqi caves overflowed with abundant spiritual energy. As Shen Jiu moved through the caverns, his expression grew increasingly grim. Those days, he'd squandered under Xu Zhanlao and Wu Yanji had been of no small consequence. Within the new generation of Peak Lords, Yu Qingyang had naturally attained core formation first. Qi Qingqi and Liu Qingge had followed practically on his heels, breaking through at the same time. On D Peak's Sheng Qinghua, with his mediocre background, had barely managed to keep up, but even he had achieved official ascension. However, the more anxious Shen Jiu grew, the more stuck he became, until he was suspended in place and unable to progress. He was racked with stress and anxiety. It was like he was swallowing 100 kilos of tobacco every day. It smoldered within his head and stomach, stoking his flames of rage and irritation until they erupted. With Shen Jiu like this, no one dared to get on his bad side. But even if they didn't dare, Shen Jiu didn't let them go. Lo Binghe was using the incorrect cultivation manual that Shen Jiu had handed him. He should have long since died bleeding from 7 apertures, his body rupturing down from his bones, skins, meridians, tendons, and flesh. But not only has he failed to come to pass, Lo Binghe's cultivation was steadily improving. Furthermore, Shen Jiu had told Ning Yingying thousands of times to stay far away from Lo Binghe and that she wasn't allowed to get involved with him. So why did he see them every day whispering together before his eyes? Shen Jiu was filled with paranoia. He forever felt like everyone was secretly talking behind his back, discussing how he'd been unable to attain core formation even after this long. That it was unbecoming for one in his position. That they hoped to secretly finish him off and replace him. So now, he secluded himself within the Lingqi caves. If he still couldn't make a breakthrough. Shen Jiu sat upon the stone platform, but his thoughts continued to spiral everywhere until he'd worked himself up into a cold sweat. His breaths and circulation choked, stars flashing in his vision. Suddenly he felt a burst of spiritual energy raging rampant through his meridians. This was no small matter. Panicking, he quickly went still, sitting tight as he attempted to rein in his mind, when a person suddenly approached him from behind. Shen Qingqiu's hair stood on end and he snatched up Zhu Yao, drawing it halfway as he yelled, "Who's there?" A palm gently pressed against his shoulder. "It's me," said Yu Qingyan. Shen Qingqiu said nothing. Yu Qingyan continued to send him spiritual energy, pacifying his wild spiritual fluctuations in their violent stampede. "My apologies. Your mind and spirit are currently disturbed. I frightened you." Shen Qingqiu had been frightened by his own spiraling thoughts. For this reason, he was even less amenable to listen to others point it out. "Well, who's frightened?" he snapped angrily. "Zhang Minxiao never enters the Lijing caves for secluded cultivation. No, so why must you fight me for a spot the moment I do?" "It's not true that I never entered them," said Yu Qingyang. "I've come here before." Shen Qingqiu was baffled by this tangent. "Well, who cares whether your esteemed self has come here?" Yu Qingyang sighed. "Shidi, can you not just stay quiet for a while and concentrate on regulating your breathing?" Upon a stone candlestick's dried wax, a flame flickered to life. Shen Qingqiu hadn't planned to retort, but when he took in the full sight of the cave he'd chosen, he was stunned. "Did someone duel to the death here?" he blurted out. Countless slashes from either blade or axe gouged the cavern walls, leaving the impression of a disfigured face covered within the layer upon layer of scars. The effect was both sinister and terrifying. Behind him, Yu Qingyang said, "No. Duels are forbidden in the Liji caves." Other than the sword gashes, there were swaths upon swaths of dark red bloodstains. Some looked like blood spray, and others were splattered after someone had been pierced through a sharp blade. Others appeared from someone slamming their forehead into the wall. It was as if they were begging for something, leaving behind smear after smear with each impact. Shen Qingqiu stared at those almost blackened stains. Then, did someone die here? Whenever they interacted, it was usually Yu Qingyang who talked tirelessly. Never had there been a situation like this where Yu Qingyang refused to utter a single word. Shen Qingqiu found this alien and strange, to the point that goosebumps broke out over his body. "Yu Qingyan, I'm here. If you're here, why won't you say something?" "Isn't it because the moment I do, you'll find it annoying?" Shen Qingqiu snorted and laughed. "Well, that's right. You are very annoying. You know it too." But he didn't want to fall into a silence within this darkness either, so he could only reluctantly continue on this thread. "I heard that sometimes they'll shut disciples and other sect members inside the Liji caves, like those who are experiencing a qi deviation, or those who have resorted to unnatural paths. Do you think this might have been one of those situations?" After a long time, Yu Qingyang made a non-committal noise. "Oh." Shen Qingqiu had received the cold shoulder, but he still squinted at a stretch of the wall. "Well, it seems whoever this was wanted to very much leave," he concluded. "They struggled for a long time before dying. If all this blood had come from the same person, even if they had survived, they would have one foot in the grave." This is the same place where he met Liu Qingge, isn't it? I feel like it is. Shen Qingqiu suddenly felt that something was off about the hand that Yu Qingyang had on his back. Alarmed, he'd said, "What's wrong?" It was a long moment before Yu Qingyang replied, "Nothing." Shen Qingqiu shut up. He couldn't see Yu Qingyang's expression where he stood behind him, but he could feel the hand pressing him spiritual energy and how it trembled slightly. "What? What? What?" When Shen Qingqiu stirred, he felt a coolness trickling from the wounds on his body. The burning, hellish pain had been alleviated by quite a bit. He struggled to open his eyes. On one knee beside him was a figure, currently looking down as he examined Shen Qingqiu's condition. Upon the white stone platform, a black kim was evenly laid, plain and rustic longsword held firmly beneath it. Several empty, up-ended medicine bottles lay scattered about. The sword was Jiangsu. The person was, as one would expect, Yu Qingyan. It was the same gentle and handsome face, just a good deal paler than usual, the exhaustion evident. At this sort of time, only Yu Qingyan would still come to see him. "How did you get in?" Shen Qingqiu asked, his voice hoarse. Lo Binghe was determined to make him suffer. There was no way he'd have been willing to let Yu Qingyang enter the water prison to help him keep holding on by a thread. Seeing that Shen Qingqiu could speak, Yu Qingyang sighed in relief. He held his hand while whispering, "Stop talking and focus." He wanted to pass Shen Qingqiu's spiritual energy and help those wounds heal faster. This time at last, Shen Qingqiu didn't brush him aside because right now he was thinking, that's right. No matter what, he's still a sect leader. As harsh as Lo Binghe and that old geezer from Wanhua Palace wanted to be, they at least had to show some superficial courtesy. But it must have taken a lot of trouble for Yu Qingyang to gain access. Spiritual energy coursed through Shen Qingqiu's wounds, and the pain in his twisting flesh felt like dense clusters of iron needles stabbing into him. Shen Qingqiu clenched his teeth, his hatred surging to the point that when he laughed instead, that little bastard Lo Binghe sure has plenty of tricks up his sleeve. At the sound of the bone-deep venom within his tone, Yu Qingyang sighed again. In truth, Yu Qingyang wasn't the type to sigh much, but when Shen Qingqiu was inevitably capable of wearing him to the bone, Shidi, he said exhausted, we've already come this far. Why do you still refuse to consider your wrongdoings? Even if someone had knocked out his teeth, even if he was left swallowing his own blood, Shen Qingqiu had always stubbornly refused to admit his transgressions, especially in front of Yu Qingyang, in front of whom you could absolutely forget about any confessions. What wrongdoings? Shen Qingqiu asked bitterly. Zhe Minxiang, please tell me, what is Lo Binghe if not a bastard? Just you wait. He won't be satisfied only taking it out on me. If in the future some tumultuous storm upsets the cultivation world, then the only thing I will have done wrong was fail to cut him down at the start. Yu Qingyang shook his head. It seemed like he anticipated this answer and that he had no desire to advise or admonish him. The situation was already gone past the point of no return. Any further admonishment was pointless. Suddenly he asked, Did you really kill Liu Shidi? Shen Qingqiu didn't want to look at his face at all while he answered. But he couldn't help but lift his eyes, giving Yu Qingyang's expression a quick glance. He froze for a moment, then abruptly yanked his hand out of Yu Qingyang's grip and sat up. You repeatedly said that you'd kill him one day, said Yu Qingyang, but I never thought that you would actually do it. Aren't you thinking it now? Shen Qingqiu asked coldly. He's already been killed. Does Zhang Minxizhang not think it too late to rebuke this humble Shen at this point? Or do you wish to cleanse the sect? I have no right to rebuke you, said Yu Qingyang. Both his eyes and expression were exceedingly serene, so much that Shen Qingqiu inexplicably became furious with shame. Then what are you trying to do? Has Shidi ever considered that if you hadn't treated Lo Binghe like that in the beginning, everything that unfolded today would never have happened? Shen Qingqiu burst into laughter. Why does Zhang Minxiang say such ludicrous things? What's happened has happened. I've already considered it hundreds and thousands of times. There is no if, no in the beginning. There was never any chance of redemption. Yu Qingyang slowly raised his face. Shen Qingqiu knew that saying those words was as good as taking a knife and stabbing it into Yu Qingyang's chest. At first he was gleeful, but then he looked at Yu Qingyang, woodenly kneeling as he stared blankly at Shen Qingqiu. All of Yu Qingyang's composure, poise, and demeanor had disappeared, as if he'd aged many years in an instant. And when Shen Qingqiu saw this, a strange sensation suddenly welled inside his heart. It was probably pity. The stalwart mountain that never changed, the eternally calm and collected sect leader Yu of Sangjiang Mountain, was at this moment so wretched, so browbeaten, that Shen Qingqiu couldn't help but feel pity. And with this pity, something inside Shen Qingqiu's chest, a knot that had resided with him for many years, finally came undone. With that, he came to the cheerful conclusion that Yu Qingyang had truly done everything he could. He'd gone above and beyond to fulfill the calls of both kindness and duty. Regardless of how much guilt weighed down his heart, his debt had long since been repaid in full. You should go, said Shen Qingqiu. I'll tell you this. Even if all of this could be redone from the beginning, in the end the conclusion would remain the same. My heart is full of malice, my insides hatred and resentment. Today, Lo Binghe wishes for me to die horribly, and I only have myself to blame. Do you still hold such hatred within yourself? Asked Yu Qingyang. Shen Qingqiu laughed uproariously. Only when I see other people unhappy can I be happy myself. What do you think? Holding Shansu across both hands, Yu Qingyang offered it to Shen Jiu. If you still hold such hatred, draw Shansu and take my life. Shen Jiu scoffed. You ask me to kill you here, sect leader Yu? Are you unsatisfied with the crimes Lo Binghe has already charged me with? Do you think them too few? Besides, who do you think you are? My hatred will be resolved as long as I kill you. I'm far beyond cure. I hate everything. Don't blame this humble Shen for any disrespect or mockery, but if sect leader Yu considers himself that very cure, then he thinks too highly of himself. He was devastatingly straightforward with his humiliation of Yu Qingyang, but the latter didn't withdraw his hands. It was like he hadn't understood. Instead, he seemed to summon his courage. Xiao Zhu, don't call me that! Shen Jiu snarled. Slowly, Yu Qingyang's hands slumped, the sword lowering with them. A long moment passed, and then he went to hold Shen Jiu's hand again. He sent him an unceasing flow of spiritual energy, helping to alleviate those injuries. It was like his courage had been shattered, for all through the following moments, Yu Qingyang never again opened his mouth to speak. Finally, Shen Jiu said, I thank Shaman Shizhong for his generosity. Now get lost. Never appear before me ever again. Yu Qingyang put Shansu back on his waist and then complied with Shen Jiu's wish and slowly walked out. If you can escape this, sect leader Yu, get as far away as you can. From now on, never again involve yourself with a thing like Shen Jiu. We have a part 7. We have a part 7! With his remaining eye, Shen Jiu stared at the cellar entrance. After staring at it for an unknown number of days, Lo Binghe finally returned. Even when inside a damp and gloomy underground prison, Lo Binghe was as graceful and elegant as ever, unsoiled and pristine. As he stepped over the hardened, blackened bloodstains on the floor, he spoke charmingly. Sect leader Yu kept the appointment as expected. I am truly grateful to that tactful yet sorrowful letter of blood Shizun wrote. Otherwise, this disciple could never have succeeded so easily. Originally, this disciple wanted to bring sect leader Yu's body back to show Shizun, but the arrows had been drenched in a rare poison. When he got close and touched them, even slightly, sect leader Yu just... Alas, I couldn't retrieve his sword. Let's call it a memento. I could only retrieve his sword. Let's call it a memento for Shizun. Lo Binghe was lying. Lo Binghe was a shameless, treacherous little liar who spoke only falsehoods. His flagrant lies were uncountable. So this time, too, he had to be conniving, with some plot or scheme with which to deceive others. Lo Binghe sat down on a chair off to the side. Whenever he watched Shen Jiu scream and wail, he always used this seat. He scraped at the leaves drifting within the steaming cup of tea and commented, Heroes and famed swords come in pairs. Shansu is indeed an excellent blade, worthy of sect leader Yu. However, there's something even more wondrous about that sword. Sect leader Yu's cultivation has truly opened my eyes. While Shizun is enjoying his remaining days here, if you're bored with nothing to do, you can thoroughly ponder it. It is truly very interesting. Shen Jiu didn't understand. In Huanhua Palace's water prison, upon their last meeting with each other, he'd done his utmost to be callous, cruel, and sarcastic. He'd told Yu Qingyang to get lost, and Yu Qingyang had done so. Shen Jiu had been uncertain if that letter of blood would call him here, but no normal person, if they were of sound thought, would step into such a blatant, undisguised trap. He still didn't understand. I thought you weren't coming. Lo Binghe found his results yet unsatisfactory. He smiled brightly. All right. Though Shizun's letter of blood was awfully heart-wrenching, it was a bit sloppy and half-hearted. After all, it had been perfunctorily written for this disciple while under his great duress. This disciple understands. Therefore, in order to express your sincerity, I had 2 other things sent with it. Shen Jiu quite understood. Those other things were the 2 legs that had once been attached to his body. This was far too comical. Once he waited days and nights for that person, but he hadn't come. And now, when he never thought that person would, he just had to. On the corner of Shen Jiu's lips hung a cold smile. Yu Qingyang, Yu Qingyang. Originally, Lo Binghei's mood could have been considered cheerful, but when he saw that bizarre smile, he inexplicably became upset. "What are you smiling about?" he asked gently. Shen Jiu ignored him, but continued to sneer. Lo Binghei shed his gleeful expression. "Shen Jiu," he said attentively, "do you think that pretending to be insane will work on me?" "Lo Binghei," said Shen Jiu, enunciating every syllable, "you're a bastard. You know that?" A sudden silence descended around them. Lo Binghei stared at him, and Shen Jiu stared unswervingly back. Suddenly, Lo Binghei's lips twitched. His right hand gently caressed Shen Jiu's left shoulder and then squeezed. A terrifying scream pierced the air. Blood sprayed from the fresh stump that had been Shen Jiu's left arm, and he howled while roaring with laughter, his breath broken and stilted. "Oh, Lo Binghei! Oh, Lo Binghei, you!" For Lo Binghei, torturing Shen Jiu was an incredibly satisfying pastime. Shen Jiu's screams made him feel like he was floating in paradise. But this time, for some reason, Lo Binghei didn't feel the same joy. His chest heaved, its rise and fall growing increasingly violent. With a kick, he knocked Shen Jiu over, making him spin in place on the ground, smearing blood all over the floor. Previously, Lo Binghei had ripped off his 2 legs in the same manner, as if plucking limbs from an insect. Pain tore through Shen Jiu, the kind that made him feel like he was in hell, yet the sensation no longer seemed real. On the contrary, he became lucid, clear, rational. "Lo Binghei, everything you've done today, you owe to taking me as your master, so shouldn't you thank me? Instead, you're wholly unable to tell what's good for yourself. As expected, you're an ungrateful bastard. Ha 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 ha!" Lo Binghei's rage passed in an instant, and suddenly he calmed down. His smile was sinister, and he said softly, "Do you want to die? How can something like death come so cheaply? Shizun, you've committed many evils in your life. You hurt those with whom you've had grievances, and also those against whom you bore no grudges. Even when half in your grave, you managed to drag down a sect leader. If your death isn't drawn out, if you don't simultaneously endure everyone else's suffering at least once, how can you do right by them?" With a wave of his hand, he cast Shen Jiu's fragments onto the ground. When Shen Jiu heard the resulting clatter, it was as if his throat had been slashed with an invisible knife. His laughter instantly stopped. Amidst disheveled hair and a face drenched in blood, a single eye shone brightly, a white fire glowing in the dark night. He shakily dragged himself towards those broken sword fragments. There was nothing left, only a single blade. He had single-handedly created the Lo Binghei of today, but who had single-handedly wrought the ending of Shen Jiu's? Yu Qingyang shouldn't have met this kind of fate. For the purpose of attending a decades-late appointment in order to fulfill a futile, meritless promise, the sword broken, the man dead, it shouldn't have been like this. Threads of blood unfurled, extending outward, right before they should have, converged into one, and they passed each other by. Oh! Oh my God! What? What? I did chapter 93, and chapter 93 I was like, wow, this is a pretty short chapter. I guess chapter 94 won't be that long. And then as I stared dead straight into the camera, and then no, chapter 94 kept going, and I was like, oh my God, we have a part 5, we have a part 6, we have a part 7. And here's the thing, y'all. Here's the thing about it. I didn't want to stop reading. I wanted to keep going. I wanted more. Shen Jiu, I hold you up to a high standard, sir. But if you and Lo Binghei want to step back for a second and let's focus on Shen Jiu and Yu Qingyang, I'm fine with that. Oh my God. I went to pour myself some new tea and it's too hot. It's much too hot. But yeah, okay, so why do I like the first half of the book more than the second half of the book? I talked a little bit about chapter 93. So I'll get to where y'all can see this. Chapter 94 is like right after chapter 94 is right after the Liu Qingge and Shen Jiu succubi adventure. What a tone shift, right? It's right after that. Although it just came off of the chapters that were the multiverse with the OG Lo Binghe. So I guess it would kind of make sense that we throw them in here. Okay. That seems legit. Fine. But then right after chapter 94 is the Zhu Long experience. And then supposedly next week we have chapter 73, which is the continuation or the part of the Shen Jiu flashback that we weren't shown that was cut out. So I'm like, why'd you put Zhu Long in between those two chapter sets? What a weird thing to do, MXTX, but I haven't read chapter 73 and 95 yet, so I'm sure there was a reason, and we'll get to it next week, but I'm like, what? And then chapter 93 conveniently happens right after the wine chapters, which are my least favorite chapters of all of MXTX. And so I'm like, okay, I don't think that helps me because chapter 93, where it's the questions and it comes right off of those horrendous chapters where Lo Binghe is kind of the worst. And Shin Qingqiu's like, I guess this is my life now. I guess we'll be together. And the chapter right after the interview is the very last chapter of the book, which I'm sure is them together. And I'm sure they're like, we're so happy and in love. And I'm like, are you? I mean, they are. Don't get me wrong. I know Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe love each other. And that's real good for them. But I'm just like, I feel like I would have loved if, again, we had a whole other volume and volume 4 was actually just an entire volume of Lo Binghe and Shin Qingqiu expanding on those questions from Sheng Qinghua. I would love that because there were some really good nuggets in there where Lo Binghe was genuinely sweet and Shin Qingqiu seemed to genuinely care about him. But then there were a lot of moments that I was like, Shin Qingqiu, are you just settling? Are you just settling on Lo Binghe because if you don't, he'll whine and you'll feel sorry for him? Are you just settling for someone that's used their trauma to wrangle you into a relationship with them? And you feel guilty because you were conveniently put into the body of the person that was in charge of some of that trauma? So I don't know. I just, that interview chapter, I was really excited about it and there were some good parts of it, but it didn't live up to my expectations. So I was like, Chapter 94 though, which we're going to talk about for the rest of this discussion, lived up to all of the expectations that I didn't even know I had and then some. I know why y'all are obsessed with Shen Jiu now, and particularly Shen Jiu and Yu Qingyan's relationship. Oh my God. Yes, please. Like I was all about this. This was like, okay, let's talk about this because Shen Jiu is a little shit, but I like characters like Shen Jiu because they're very complex, they're very layered, and they also have a lot of flaws, but there's a maturity about them. And there's parts of them that like, you just want to pick apart and dissect. Like, I don't know how much more I can pick apart and dissect Lo Binghe. I'm like, he's got, Lo Binghe, what's interesting about his character is that he has this trauma that you can peel back some layers to, but he is kind of a surface level character. He just kind of is. It's like, here was his trauma. Here it was. Here's the things that's happened since then. But Shen Jiu, you could peel back that a lot of ways, especially how he interacts with other people. And I guess that's the thing too. Lo Binghe doesn't interact with anybody else except Shin Qingqiu. So you really can only evaluate his character in terms of how he interacts with Shin Qingqiu. I mean, the other characters he just kind of ignores and avoids and doesn't care about. But with Shen Jiu, he interacts with people in different ways and it's kind of fascinating. And then you have Yu Qingyan, which, oh my God, is kind of the opposite of Shin Qingqiu that's been inhabited by Shen Yan, and we should talk about it. So let's just dive into this, shall we? Let's just dive into this. So I will say this before we go any further. I will say this for Shin Qingqiu and Lo Binghe. It does seem like Lo Binghe is making efforts to respect Shin Qingqiu's boundaries, and that's a good thing. That was something that I wanted to happen. That's good. Good on Lo Binghe. Solid, gold stars, good for you. They do seem that they trust one another. Or Shin Qingqiu's like, he's pretty easy to understand. So he's like, and so then there's, and they tend to dodge difficulty. My one thing is the communication aspect of it is still, I'm like, clearly Shen Jiu, I guess my biggest flaw for them before we dive into Shen Jiu, because there's a lot to talk about, is I still wish that Shen Jiu would speak up more about what bothers him, because there still is that wall there where Shen Jiu, or Shen Yan in this case, because I'm going to say Shen Jiu a lot in this discussion. Shen Yan's Shen Jiu, he doesn't want to fully say what's on his mind because he doesn't want to make Lo Binghe feel bad. But at the end of the day, that's kind of doing their relationship a disservice, because if you don't talk about what you're uncomfortable with, then eventually it's going to keep happening and it's just going to wear you down. And you're either going to give in and settle and be miserable and to try to convince yourself you're not, or it's going to make the relationship fall apart and it doesn't have that longevity or sustainability to it. So you have to be honest. And to Lo Binghe's credit, he's telling Shen Jiu to be honest with him, but Shen Jiu also knows that Lo Binghe doesn't have a lot of emotional maturity and can't handle those conversations. So it's just kind of like one of these situations, and it is very frustrating because I'm like, I want to root for them, but they also have a long way to go before they're in a healthy relationship. But they're getting better. That's at least something. It's better than chapter 89 and 90, so that's good. But let's talk about chapter 94. This was the better chapter, and this chapter was amazing. I wanted to keep reading this story. I love how we went through different portions of the novel. We picked up and left off where we picked up and left off in the story. We got more with OG Shen Jiu, which was amazing, and to see like his whole thing. I think it's important to note that Shen Jiu was kind of a little asshole even before he met Chu Jianlo. I think it's important to know that Shen Jiu always had a negative attitude. He always had a negative or aggressive attitude, which is why I kind of likened him to Lo Binghe a little bit, because Lo Binghe always has been kind of devious. The difference is what's so fascinating is that Shen Jiu and Lo Binghe kind of go on similar journeys, but they take very different routes and end up in different places. And Yu Qingyan, who is not like Shen Yan as Shen Jiu, but does some things that are different but have different effects. So we need to talk about that. The one thing that is not answered for us is why did Yu Qingyan not come back? And I can't remember. Chapter 80 and 81 were kind of bad chapters, so I've kind of eviscerated them from my mind. I don't quite remember if Yu Qingyan talks about why he didn't come back in that moment. I guess, well, this is volume 4. I guess before next week, I might go back and look at that again before we dive into chapter 73. Might go back and check that out. But we don't exactly know. And so I feel like that was the one thing they left out of the story at this point. Yu Qingyan can't give Shen Jiu an answer. And so I'll be curious to see if chapter 73 addresses why he didn't come back and what the reasons were. And I mean, my guess is that he likes Shen Jiu and he was trying to get strong enough to come back and get him. And I think maybe in the end of volume 3, he says he came back and by then Shen Jiu was already gone and he couldn't trace him. And so instead he went back to the cultivation, to the sect. I can't quite remember. So that's going to be, maybe, I'm going to check volume 3 before next week and see if that's stated in there or not. Well, I'll wade through the parts I don't want to read to find that reveal and see if we get anything there. But yeah, Shen Jiu is kind of a little shit and they're busking in the streets, but Shen Jiu is also under the mentality, you get kind of why Shen Jiu is like that, because it's one of those, they're busking, they're trying to like earn, food to survive. So he's like, it's one of those like survival of the fittest mentalities. It's do or die. You got to be tough or you're going to get killed sort of things. And Shen Jiu seems like, from the way they talk about him in these chapters, that he started out being kind of scrawny and weak, and Yi Chu kind of helped him, or Yu Qi rather, helped him to get stronger. And Yu Qi always seemed like a strong kind of bulky guy that was tall even as a kid. And so he kind of was intimidating on his own. But yeah, so then we have the young master coming in. Oh my God, like MXTX MXTX spared no expense in these chapters. She was pretty brutal. And she was very unapologetic about it. I will say that she's pretty edgy in Scum Villain. I feel like she restrains herself more and is a more elegant writer with like Heaven Visual's Blessing. But I feel here she's a little bit more raw. And so I can see a lot of people liking this writing style the most because she's very like, she don't hold back. She's very much like, here's how it is. This is how it was. Deal. And basically like, you know, holds no punches, right? And I like that about it. I like how raw it is. It's very heavy and dark and unapologetic. And I kind of like that about it. But anyway, so we find out that we don't really get to see exactly what ends up happening between the events of part 1 and part 2. We know from the flashback chapters, we know from chapters 72 and 74, way back then, we know that after Shen Jiu went to stay with the Chu family, that Yu Chi was there for a while as Chige, and then he left. And after he left, that's when we assume that part 2 is happening. After Yu Chi has left to go on his way, that's when we're doing the segment where Chu Zhanlao is beating up on Shen Jiu. Now, I got this impression, and the text does not directly say it in black and white, but it's very heavily implied that with Shen Jiu originally, he had been sexually assaulted by Chu Zhanlao. And then he had sought refuge. They had sought refuge from Chu Haitang. That was my impression, was that the brother was assaulting Shen Jiu after he beat him. And that was also tied to the fact that he wanted to keep Shen Jiu around and marry him off to his sister so that he could keep his sister around, knowing that she would never really get serious with Shen Jiu and knowing he could keep Shen Jiu under his thumb. That's the impression that I got, but I could be wrong. But I got that impression, especially when we find out later that Shen Jiu wants nothing. He doesn't want to even sleep in the same space as people of the same sect. And my dogs are going to play with this, but we'll get back to that part here in a second. But he finds out that Shen Jiu can read. And of course, the first characters that he writes on the page are 7 and 9, representing Yu Qingyan and him. Oh my God. Right? So Shen Jiu's 12 at the time, and Chu Zhanlao is 16 and trying to marry off Shen Jiu to his sister so that he can keep him under his thumb. And 12 years old is insane. That is horrifying that all this stuff was happening to a kid that was in 6th grade. Like, that's insane. And the thing about it is, children are so impressionable that they remember shit like this. And this shapes who they are. And the fact that, you know, Yu Chi, he was a little bit older, but they seemed like they came from similar upbringings. And Yu Chi was just one of those rare exceptions where he seemed like whatever happened, Yu Chi was able to stomach it. He had kind of like this. And again, that kind of fuels later on Shen Jiu's kind of hatred in that, oh, Yu Chi's also one of the special ones, but not me. So it's just, oh, it's so horrible. But the brothers concocting this giant plan, right? And then they ask who did the one thing where what was it? Yep. And that's when Shen Jiu gets taken away. But he was waiting for a certain someone to keep his promise and rescue him from a sea of suffering. And then we cut straight to him asking, saying that he thought a lot about why Yu Chi never returned to look for him. That was kind of like the thing, is that then we have the idea that Shen Jiu has this issue of abandonment, which again seemed to relate a lot to Lo Binghe, especially in the current timeline, because you had like Bing Mei having this attachment towards Shen Xingqiu, and then you had Shen Jiu develop this attachment towards Yu Qingyan. The thing is, like, Lo Binghe, as a kid, was much more obedient, much more kind, especially to Shen Qingqiu, but then to everybody else, he was kind of a menace. But then you have Shen Jiu, who's kind of a menace to everybody else, but is kind in front of Yu Qingyan, right? So it's kind of the same thing, similar, although I will say that this story in the OG timeline makes me much more appreciative of these bakas. I'm like, I can take these bakas being stupid over this heartbreak hotel. Because this is heartbreaking. This is heartbreaking. I legit was like reading this feeling sorrier and sorrier for the situation because we know how it all ends and how it goes down. And it's like watching a train wreck. You can't do anything about it. It's just like, But yeah, Shen Jiu talks about how he would have preferred that something, because here's the thing, he would have preferred that something bad had happened to Yu Qingyan, and that had been the reason why he never came and got him, because at least he would say that there was a reason he didn't come and get him, rather than him just abandoning Shen Jiu. But we don't know exactly what the story was. We do have this whole Wu Yanji, and I forgot about him until he got brought up again, that he was the master, the corrupt master teaching Shinjo that's part of his shadowy past. And Shen Jiu kills him in the forest to keep him from fighting Yu Qingyan, which now we have more context to, because in the novel, in way back when we were at the one city, I don't know if it was Jinlan City or where it was, but in there it was known that he killed his master, and that was part of the backstory that was said before the water prison, where it was one of the things that Haiteng said to convict Shen Qingqiu, and Shen Qingqiu was like, shit, she's gonna bring that up again. But we find out in this chapter, much like how Lo Binghe was constantly accused of killing like Gong Yizhao and doing all these things, then we find out after the fact that actually no, he wasn't involved in that, or there was another reason. We find out here that yeah, Shen Jiu did kill Wu Yanzi. My pronunciation this set is horrible, sorry. But the reason was it was to save Yu Qingyan, because we come to find out that Yu Qingyan was a fresh cultivator in the Immortal Alliance conference when he was challenged, and if Shen Jiu hadn't killed him, he possibly could have hurt Yu Qingyan. And I was like, what? It's insane, right? So, and my dog is being really annoying, wanting me to throw this stupid ball. So, basically, when they discover, and the part that's so sad is that even before he's Shen Qingqiu, even before he has all this prestige around him, we see Shen Jiu roaming around the forest of the Immortal Alliance conference, like pilfering through the pockets of dead corpses he's killed of disciples, which is so wild. And then that's when Yu Qi comes down and they meet again, and Yu Qi and them know each other, and it eventually leads to Wu Yanji being killed. And that's when Shen Jiu, of course, is like, oh, so you're at, Qijing Peak now. Oh, you've made something for yourself. Oh, I'm here. No worries. I'm here pilfering dead bodies, and I'm basically a rat, but oh, you've made it. Cool. Why didn't you come again and rescue me? And Yu Qingyan can't give him an answer. And it's so crazy. So I'm hoping that chapter 73 gives us some answers as to why he couldn't, but I don't know. I'm just so baffled. I'm so floored that, I'm so baffled that we don't get an answer, because I'm like, that was your one chance. That was your one chance to tell him, right? And I felt like it was very similar, Yu Qingyan, his lack of being able to communicate to Shinjo of why he didn't come back and get him, it felt a lot like Shen Qingqiu when Lo Binghe is like, why'd you toss me into the abyss? Why'd you do that? And Shen Qingqiu's like, well, the system told me that I had to do it, and I kind of misunderstood and thought that was the only way that we could fix things, so that's why I did it, and I knew you'd be okay, So, I do wonder if, what if Yu Qingyan, what if he had a system that he was listening to, and that's what he thought, but I doubt it. But what if he thought that Shen Jiu was going to be okay? What if he didn't realize how extreme the trauma and abuse was that he was receiving from the brother? And then he realized all too late that that wasn't the case and was ashamed about it. Kind of like Shen Qingqiu was. But it's too little too late. The parallels. MXTX's writing in this segment is so good, and the parallels are just absolutely wild. Like between all these characters and the way that it weaves into the story of how things end up in the OG version versus the new version. It's so crazy. But poor Shen Jiu, he believes that he's someone that was rotten from birth, which is so sad. Because Lo Binghe kind of thinks the same thing. He doesn't want to talk about his demon blood, but he believes that it's a source of him being like this monster. And Shen Jiu believes that he's the exact same way. Which is really sad. I don't know what my dogs are doing now. Anyway, part 4 is just talks about Shen Jiu's hatred, which can kind of connect to Lo Binghe in a way, although we'll say I'm so glad in the actual story Lo Binghe loves Shen Qingqiu, because I think that and what it is that kindness is that because Shen Qingqiu in the form of Shen Yan showed kindness to Lo Binghe as a kid, that kindness came back around, right? Meanwhile, you had the brother, that because the brother was so awful to Shen Jiu while he was a child, he came back and not only hated the brother, but hated everybody else. And that's what, and even Yu Qingyan, who fell in love with Shen Jiu, it wasn't enough to save the situation. It wasn't enough. By that point, by the time that Shen Jiu was an adult, he had so much hatred in his heart that Yu Qingyan couldn't even budget, which is really sad, right? I thought we would actually get into the death of Liu Qingge in this portion, but it's just hinted at and we know what happens, so it's not delved in any further. We just know that Liu Qingge, of course, Shen Jiu, like we've talked about in previous chapters, hates Liu Qingge because he's basically like Lo Binghe. He's like Lo Binghe with parents and a good childhood. is basically his story. Because yeah, he has good looks, he has good sword fighting skills, he had like this great upbringing, everything's all coming up roses for Liu Qingge, and Shen Jiu hates him because of it, which is so wild. But it's crazy, they just keep taunting each other. And Liu Qingge questioning Shen Qingqiu's talent is what kind of throws him over the edge. Which, watching their conversations in this, it now makes when Shen Yan's Shen Qingqiu finds Liu Qingge in the cave and saves him, for Liu Qingge to be like, the fudge did you do that for? And that starts a whole different, like, this chapter set, chapter 94 shows me that MXTX getting to the point of every moment of kindness has a karmic reward. Like Shen Qingqiu being nice pays back so many dividends throughout the story that when we see Shen Jiu and how he has the opportunity to be nice, but he doesn't, how much worse things get because of that, right? And so then, oh my God, the one thing that Yu Qingyang says to him, he says, you should be kinder. Liu Shidi isn't such a bad person. He's like that with everyone, not just you. But Shen Jiu in this moment is so blinded. He's like, well, is he like that with you? I think he's like that with just me. And he says, Yu Qingyang goes, if you extend him a single share of kindness, he'll return it twofold. What happens in the cave? In volume 1, Shen Qingqiu saves Liu Qingge in that same cave with all the blood smears where, I'll show you the picture from this chapter set in a minute. Well, where Shen Jiu went to go train, Liu Qingge was having a chi deviation in that same spot, and Shen Qingqiu saved him and showed him that kindness, and he returned it twofold and was loyal to him for the rest of the story. And that's kind of this moment too, where we see that Liu Qingge is kind of like Lo Binghe in the sense that they repay kindness and instantly attach and show loyalty to that person that's kind to them. But Shen Jiu believes that it's too far gone. He's not capable of such things. His heart is too bitter. He can't turn back and be nice. And it's so horrible. Yep. Instead, it just makes things worse and worse. So what makes it even more upsetting is that, we find that Shen Qingqiu, when Yu Qingyang found him, Shen Jiu was in a brothel. And he's like, how'd you know I was here? and basically finds out that Yu Qingyan followed some people that were going to gang up on him. And he's like, oh, so you saw people were going to come bully me and you just came to follow and see what would happen. It's like, I think it's really important to know that Shen Jiu, because of his background with the possible assault from the brother, he's had this bad relationship with men, and so he can't ever be around them, and instead he clings to female presences. Which, you know what? I can absolutely understand where Shen Jiu comes from that, right? I can absolutely understand that. I've had so many creepy encounters with heterosexual men that there are like sometimes where I just feel really uncomfortable around them. Like I've always been comfortable around gay men or men that aren't sexually interested in women, because I always feel that kind of safety of, oh, they're not going to try anything, so it's fine. And I feel a little bit like Shen Jiu because of his trauma and experience. I'm like, I get that. I get why he wouldn't want to be around men, because he's like, he can't trust it, right? I've known people that have had bad relationships with their dads. So anytime there's a male authority figure, they just have a bad relationship with them. It's the same. It can go vice versa. But I definitely understand where Shen Jiu's coming from. And for the first time in an MXTX novel, the idea of the potentially, although this Shen Jiu, we're going to talk about it here in a second a little bit more, presumably is heterosexual, but it's the first time in an MXTX novel where them gravitating towards a female character isn't just to put on a show or be fake. It's out of a genuine need for sanctuary. And it's like, oh, it's gut-wrenching. Because all I could think of was, Wei Wuxian has a bunch of ghostly women around him, but it's just for looks. Hua Chong has a bunch of female dancers in his palace, but it's just for looks. Here, Shen Jiu is around all these women because he has a deep-rooted trauma from a man that assaulted him. And it's like, it just like hits you like a ton of bricks, right? I think this also points out something very, very important. I feel like Yu Qingyan was definitely attracted to Shen Jiu and loved him, and realized all too late that love wasn't going to be reciprocated, which is really tragic. I feel like Shen Jiu was not gay. I feel like he was heterosexual, because even when he finally feels bad for Yu Qingyan's death, it's not the same as like Shen Qingqiu and Lo Binghe, and it doesn't feel like that, like the sadness of a death of someone you loved or were sexually attracted to versus the death of a friend, right? That's platonic and non-sexual. That's what it felt like. Whereas that just to me shows that Shen Yan was gay this entire time. And so him getting with Shen Qingqiu's character influenced that. So that's what it seems like to me and how it reads across to me, but you all may comment differently with that. But yeah, so then we have the scene in the cave where Shen Jiu never visits Yu Qingyan, but he visits once to get permission to go train in this cave. This is the only, I'll take my bookmark out because it's Heaven Official's Blessing. This is the only picture from that segment. It's very simple, but it's just like all the blood smattered around the cave, and then there is Yu Qingyan simply trying to help. What I find interesting is that Shen Jiu is in a very similar pose that he was in, with the same kind of spiteful expression on him that he's had earlier in the series. So, but yeah, he's like, why do you always act like this? And he tries to call him like Zhao Zhu and everything, and Shen Jiu doesn't want to go back and think of that name ever again. Even the irony, though, the irony is that the name he gets from the palace master is Qingqiu, and he hates it, but he's like, I'm going to take it out of spite because it's a name that I earned, not a name that was given. It's like, and the sad part is that Yu Qingyan doesn't seem to ever understand just how deep that hatred goes or why. And the sad part is neither of them really get a chance to communicate to figure out for each other why that would be. So it's just, it's really crazy to see just how deep Shen Jiu's hatred goes and to see what led him to become like he is in the OG novel. And I love that MXTX gives us the backstory on the Scum villain. The sad part is this is so compelling. And I'm like, airplane shooting towards the sky. You dropped this? This was really compelling shit. Like, this stuff was so interesting. And I felt so bad for Yu Qingyan, who just wanted to, like, reconnect with him and forge that relationship. And Shen Jiu kept pushing him away. And it was just like, oh, no. And you could just see, as the chapters went on, Yu Qingyan just got more and more sad and more distant and more he just gave up slowly. So that makes me so happy in the new version where Shen Qingqiu is nice to him and at least gives him the time of day. Although it makes it even more bittersweet because when he does finally confess in chapter 80, Shen Qingqiu's like, well, I'm not who you want to confess to, and so I don't love you anymore. Let's just be friends. And he's like, okay. I mean, I understand why Shen Qingqiu doesn't go hanging out with Yu Qingyan in the current timeline, because that's a sore subject. And when you friend zone somebody, you don't want to be like, but hey, we can hang out nonstop now, because you got to put some distance there. But I still think Shen Qingqiu should be able to hang out with Liu Qingge and Qi Qingqi and Ning Ying and all them, He should have that access. Go find Shang Qinghua and give him a hard time. We'll say, Shang Qinghua in chapter 93, when he said Lo Binghe was fucking exhausting, that is the one time I have connected so hardcore to Shang Qinghua. And I was like, you know what? You and I might be able to get along. I loved their interaction in this. And poor Shang Qinghua was like, I've got to ask this. Why is this system so obsessed with these questions? The fudge? So yeah, he's like, don't ever call me that name again. So then we have part 5. And part 5 is when he goes to the peak to go get permission to train in the caves. And that's when we have the picture that's in the book for them. And so the one thing that was really weird was that he secluded himself in the cave and he was on the stone platform and he was spiraling. And then he had someone approach him from behind and place the palm on his shoulder, and it was Yu Qingyan. My question is, supposedly Yu Qingyan gave him the spiritual energy in the cave. Was that all in his head? Was he just imagining Yu Qingyan in the cave and he was having a hallucination or a chi deviation? Was that happening? And so, if not, he's like, I've never entered them, but I've come here before. It's not true that I've never entered them. I've come into these caves before. And he's like, well, why have you come? And he's like, just stay quiet and concentrate on your breathing. And so I wondered if, he's like, duels are forbidden in the Lingji caves. I wonder if all the bloodstains and everything are from Yu Qingyan? If they're from him training with his sword? He's like, did someone die here? But Yu Qingyan never answers. I'm going to go back and reread chapter 80 before next week to see what all we got. Because I'm like, did Yu Qingyan train in the caves? And that's why he's not saying anything, because he doesn't want to admit to Shen Jiu that all of these like scars and everything are from him and him practicing with Shansu and the results of that. Is that what that is? I'm going to go back and reread chapter 80 before we start. Or you know what? No, I'm going to get it now. Never mind. I was like, why am I saying we're going to do it next week when I could just get it out now? Because I'll probably forget by then and then just find it and go through it. Okay. So I wanted to get to there saying what exactly happened. I didn't want to, but in the end, I'm an impulsive person. And then what does he say here? At Jinlan City, I kept calm and took the big picture into account. It would have been better to be impulsive. Ooh. He's like, wake up, you weren't wrong. He's like, return Shansu to its sheath for me. Okay, so I had the blinding white light. He's like, it's incredibly powerful, but I never draw it against enemies. You must have attempted to guess why. It's my life. Do you understand what that means? Every time I draw Shansu, it consumes my life force. He's like, was this because of a chi deviation? Okay, it says, by using his life force to channel his spiritual energy, he bound his life to his sword. If not due to a terrible accident during cultivation in which he entered chi deviation, why else would he cultivate this unnatural path? At age 15, I entered Shangding Peak. my heart preoccupied and desperate for success. I failed in my venture to become one with the sword, falling instead into this state, a state contrary to my initial goals, which left me with untold lifelong regrets. Okay. And then he says, I'm sorry. And Shen Jiu didn't understand why he was apologizing. I'm truly sorry. Even though I wanted to return as soon as possible, even though I wanted to come to get you immediately, I made a mess of things instead. You were right. In the end, I'm an impulsive person. Okay. After that, Shizun destroyed all the tendons, bones, and meridians in my body and then shut me. Oh! And then shut me inside the Lingji caves for more than a year. My body, my entirety was broken down to be rebuilt anew. I screamed and I yelled, but it was no use. For an entire year inside the pitch black cave, no matter how crazed I became, no matter how hysterical, no one listened closely to what I said, and no one let me out. I pushed myself as hard as I could. By the time I returned, Chu Manor had long been since destroyed. Oh! So, his master, because the sword didn't work properly, trapped him in those caves with his entire tendons, bones, meridians, everything destroyed so they could rebuild it inside the caves. That's what all those scars and marks are for. So when Yu Qingyang is asked what's wrong, why didn't he come back after a year? He doesn't say anything. So this whole time, Yu Qingyang won't tell him the reason that he finally tells him in chapter 80 as he's dying. He finally tells him why he didn't come back, because he was trapped in the caves. But it's like he attributes the fact that he couldn't come and save Shen Jiu as a failure of his own. And the tragic thing is, if he just told Shen Jiu what the reasoning was, I bet it would have made things a lot better. Communicate, bitches! But yeah. Oh my God. No wonder the rescuer Shen Jiu had been waiting for never returned. The sect leader never made life difficult for him, instead remained satisfying. That's how it was. I didn't mean to not return, but it is really true that the world is pitiless. And so the two of us passed each other by. That's the end of, oh my God, that's the end of this chapter, the last line. It is true. The two of us just passed each other by, and with each line he spoke, the more violently fresh blood surged. Just let me finish speaking this one time. As you always say, sorry is nothing but an empty word, completely useless. I never explained myself, but today I'm going to let you hear. Not to ask for your forgiveness or sympathy, but because if I don't say it now, it will be too late. Oh, yep. And then the system, yeah, it reveals everything. Oh my God. Yep. Yep. So there we go. But he wasn't Shen Jiu. Yeah. Okay. And he says, Zhao Zhu, don't call me that. And that's so funny that Shen Jiu says, don't call me Zhao Zhu, because the original Zhao Zhu said, don't call me that, but it was for a totally different reason. Oh my God. That is insane. Why hadn't he told him earlier? It was just like Shen Jiu and Lo Binghe. Why hadn't he told him earlier? And there's the connection there. Oh my God. Yeah. You know what? I could kind of see where, I could kind of see where going back and rereading this might be of somewhat value. So y'all might be onto something with that. You all might be onto something with rereading this story after I've finished, because now that we're coming back to this chapter, it's all starting to come back, because he said we just couldn't pass each other by. And the last line of the story is talking about how the blood, as the threads of blood unfurled and extended from where his arm is severed and the sword is lying in front of them, they should have converged into one, to be one being, to be one force, but they just pass each other by instead. MXTX. What the fudge? What the fudge is this writing? What is this amazingness? What are you doing, girl? So yeah, going back to part 6. We had part 5 where they got into the cave and everything. And then we had part 6 where he stirs and he technically is on the platform and the sword Jiu is next to him. So he's in the water prison at this point. And Yu Qingyang tried to rescue him from the water prison. I could see why y'all have some Shen Jiu, Yu Qingyang fanfiction. I can see why you would do that. I could see that. And so he tries to rescue him. And it's very weird to see Shen Qingqiu, to see the words of Shen Qingqiu calling out Lo Binghe and calling him a bastard and everything else. But it is a different timeline. It's just still very weird to see. I'm just going to say. Yep. And so he's like, we've come this far. Why do you still refuse to consider your wrongdoings? But Shen Qingqiu, he won't admit that he's wrong. Shen Jiu will not admit it, which is so sad. And that's when he asks if he killed Liu Qingge. And the crazy thing is, Yu Qingyan, because of everything that's happened, even in the original timeline, he's like, I have no right to rebuke you or tell you that you did wrong. I just wanted to know why. I'm like, oh my God. The sad thing is, what I was going to say earlier is that the sad thing about it all is that Shen Qingqiu, he does press and meddle. And then later he feels sorry about it, but he still does it anyway. Yu Qingyan, he always feels sorry about it and feels sympathy, but he doesn't press and he doesn't push himself into the fray. Like Shen Qingqiu throughout the entire first 3 volumes was constantly meddling and getting in the way and making things happen. And then sure, later on he'd be like, oh, that was a bad idea. Oh, I regret doing that. Oh no. But at least he tried. And because he tried, he ended up making a difference. Yu Qingyan, despite all of his good intentions, he never tries to interfere and let his impulses go. And it honestly causes things to just get worse. And it's like, damn. And he even tries towards the end in the water prison to tell Shen Jiu, like, you know, if you hadn't treated Lo Binghe in the beginning like that, would everything have ended up like it did? But the thing about it is, I think Shen Jiu is fair in his point saying, you know, by that point, what the right answer would have been if Shen Jiu had not encountered Chu Jianluo, then things might have been better. But that's not how it ended up. Because of that influenced everything else. So he's like, I've already considered it hundreds of thousands of times. There is no if in the beginning. There was never any chance for redemption. And the sad thing is, at that point, almost feels like Shen Jiu is saying that because he wasn't saved from the manor, that set everything in motion and there was nothing to be done about it. And in that moment, Yu Qingyan's like, it almost made it feel like it was his fault that all this went down because he didn't rescue Shen Jiu. And that is just wild. Oh my God. This whole set, I was just in awe. And he's like, you should go. He's like, do you still hold this hatred within yourself? And he's like, what do you think? And the crazy thing is that if you hate me so much, then draw the sword and take my life. But Shen Jiu won't do it. He's like, do you think that if I kill you, it's going to resolve my hatred? I'm beyond curing. I hate everything. So at this point, killing you is not going to do a damn thing. It's so sad. And then he tells Yu Qingyan to leave, and he does. And I'm like, no, just, why can't you two be together? Why can't you work this out? But nope. Instead, we cut to a one-eyed Shen Qingqiu that's literally being made into a human stick that his legs were severed and used to lure Yu Qingyan to kill him. The fudge. And I'll be honest, seeing OG Lo Binghe here, being an absolute bastard and being the worst person ever, I gave our sweet little Black Lotus a hard time for being kind of a dum-dum. I would take that over this version. I would take little Bing Mei over OG Lo Binghe any day. Any day. Because the cycle of traumatic violence continued on and made this version, the OG version of Lo Bing-hei, the worst. And I would take Bing Mei being a little dumb Black Lotus. I'll take that, actually. I'm fine with it now. This chapter made me kind of eat my words and go, no, actually we're good. This is fine. Shin Qingqiu, you lucked out. I feel like even Sheng Qinghua is kind of in awe. He's like, wow, they really did luck out. Oh my God. Yeah. And it seems like Shen Jiu didn't want Yu Qingyan to come back, but he did anyway. And then he just starts laughing as he's going insane, seeing just the blade left. I'm definitely glad we avoided that timeline in the end. I sure am glad we avoided that timeline because holy shit. Anytime we go back to the original timeline, it makes me feel instantly better, even with my qualms about Shin Qingqiu and Lo Bing-hei, which, let's be honest, they are little qualms. I'm glad they love each other, and they're doing a little bit better, and I'm very picky because MXTX is so good at writing romance usually, and her couples are usually, they speak to me and they resonate with me, so this is the first time I've been like, why isn't this resonating the same way? Which I shouldn't have much to complain about them, but I'm just being nitpicky. But in comparison, they're doing all right compared to the end of this chapter. But oh my God, that chapter was amazing. And I kind of want to instantly read chapter 73 and 95, but I'm going to be nice. I'm going to wait for some more comments. That is wild, y'all. That is wild. This chapter was so good. Chapter 94, chapter 93 was fine. It was fine. There's some funny moments. Sheng Qinghua gave me a good laugh, but chapter 94 was really freaking good. And I would read so much more into Yu Qingyan and Shen Jiu. There's just so much melancholy, so much angst, but it's not like, you know, Katy Perry Teenage Dream angst. It's like, oh, this is some horrible traumatic shit angst. And like, there's no happy ending, but it's like, it feels earned that there's no happy ending. And I'm like, damn. This was such a good chapter set. Last week was good, was Yushi Long. I liked that chapter set a lot. Chapter 94. Chapter 94 may be my favorite chapter so far. It's of volume 4. It's really, really good. And I know that a lot of you that watch these videos are big Shen Jiu fans. So you all will probably have lots to talk about as well. And I'm super excited to hear what you all have to talk about. All of your things, all the breakdowns, all the theories. I know I haven't talked enough about it, but this video is going to be 3 hours long if I don't stop now. So I'm so excited to hear your thoughts down below. Trust and believe. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care. And yeah, next week we're going to be reading their 2 chapters side by side. Chapter 73, which we had cleverly avoided before, that's going to tie into this, and chapter 95. So if it's an extension of chapter 94, hell yes. Please let me have this. So I'm so excited, y'all. It actually falls in line. I don't know why Zhu Shilong is in between them, but we'll find out. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Scum Villain Self-Saving System. Bye!